Good evening and welcome to the November 12th, 2019 Select Board meeting. We know the meeting has been properly warned because we entered into executive session at 5:30. I will pass on Chair's remarks for this evening and go right to manager's comments.
Thank you. I have two quick ones. The first is to let everybody know or remind you, if you happen to be really paying attention to the news from the town clerk's office, that there is a special election being held regarding amendments to the articles for the newly consolidated regional school district. More information on that, I'm sure, is available from the school folks, and there's been information in the paper about it. What we wanted to call out tonight is that here in this building, you already can vote during regular business hours at the town clerk's office and an early voting, or you can come to the polls next Tuesday, the 19th, between 10 a.m. and 7 p.m. The election will be downstairs in room 105 of the Municipal Center. Again, between 10 a.m. and 7 p.m. next Tuesday. I believe there's 4 separate questions to be voted. And the other is, I just wanted to clarify, we've had a lot of questions that have come up since the recent media coverage of the Hinsdale Bridge project and the grant that's been awarded, and concern about whether the fact that the grant amount was less than the requested amount might delay the project. And the answer that we have from New Hampshire DOT, who is the responsible party, there's a lot of partners involved in this, including VTrans on the Vermont side, and the local parties on both sides of the river. But New Hampshire Department of Transportation is the entity that's sort of driving the bus, so to speak. And we understand from them this will have no negative impact on the schedule, that the project is intended to be bid and for construction to begin during 2020, and for the new bridge to be open by 2023. So we're excited to share that clarification with the community. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. Are there members of this board who have comments or committee reports this evening?
I have.
Go ahead, Timothy.
Reporting from the Traffic Safety Committee, we have some important and exciting news. For quite a while, the committee has been discussing with the community and with VTrans the issues that a lot of people see, rightfully so, out on Putney Road. There's definitely some safety improvements that need to happen there, and they need to happen, frankly, before the Putney Road master plan goes into effect. So I'm really happy to announce that although we don't have exact dates and timelines yet, we've had a really good discussion and cooperation with VTrans, especially Jesse Devlin there, and also with a lot of help from Molly Burke. They're going to be moving, the state is going to be moving forward with adding a crosswalk and a walk cycle at the Hannaford intersection, which is something we definitely need, and we're really excited to reach that with them. Also a crosswalk and an RRFB as close as possible to Town Crier Drive, because there's a lot of people that go to Habitopco out there, that go to NECA. So that's something that's also very much needed to make it a little safer out there, hopefully. And also finally, we're going to be working in conjunction with VTrans to consider the impact of MUTCD compliant bike lanes, including with green paint possibly when it's appropriate, or other roadway striping changes to help justify a lower speed limit through this corridor. So improvements on Putney Road, and I know it's not as fast as a lot of people would like to see, but this is the dance that we do with Dillon's rule and state highway rules and things like that. So, but we have some really good progress in that. So.
Those are great updates.
Yeah.
Yeah, seriously, thank you. I'm glad about the crosswalks.
Me too.
David, I see you flagging me down.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I just want to add a couple of brief statements about the upcoming vote. As Peter said, the ballots are available now and right through Tuesday the 19th. There are 3 of the items are designed to remove some of the obstacles that keep the board, because we represent different sized towns with different issues, to kind of clear out some of the obstacles that regularly come up as concerns or that people are upset about or can get upset about. And the third one is to create in the constitution, basically, of the school district, the structure of leadership councils in every school building. That means that parents, students, when appropriate, board members, principals, and teachers will all be represented on a deliberative body. And so the whole community will have a voice. It's part of trying to make sure that the local contact that was lost with the elimination of the local school boards is not lost completely, that there's a structure there where people are represented. So it's really important for people to get out and have a look at those articles and read them through and make a decision for us. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Liz?
I just wanted to remind the public that our Secretary of State, Jim Condos, is coming to this room at this time tomorrow night to talk about election security, and it might be very interesting for anyone who would like to attend.
Excellent. Thank you, Liz.
Great. We'll go all in. I wanted to congratulate the football team on their victory on Saturday. I was amazed that no one said it. I was like, yes, I get to say it.
Saved it for you.
So congratulations to the Brattleboro Colonels for their state championship, and long may they reign, I guess.
Yes.
Excellent. Wonderful. Thank you for that, Daniel.
You're welcome.
Okay. At this time, I will open the floor to public participation. This is your opportunity to discuss something that is not listed on tonight's agenda. So with that clarification and opening, is there anybody that would like to come up and speak? Miss Libby, can you come up to the microphone and introduce yourself?
I am Elizabeth Howes, and I reside at 52 South Main Street. The change on South Main Street has been striking. I was with the demolition of 54, which was such a formidable structure. I feel as though I felt so helpless, because I really am like an old buildings. I love old buildings. And I felt there was so much work had gone into that building to build it. It was such a strong structure. But I really don't have a lot of background in preventing destruction of the antique homes, being able to fund up refurbishing the interior, restructuring interiors of older homes, which I think have been sort of lost on the card table of winnings and losings, where nothing happens because no one really knows what they've won. So it's kind of hard to scramble up the keys to move forward with cleaning up and strengthening the insides of these old homes. The restoration of the two buildings on Canal Street a couple of years ago and reestablishing very good rental housing was such a relief, a refreshing, that I'm thinking that there are few old places in the neighborhood of Canal Street that need that kind of hope. And I'm working on a little project. I'm not really downloading, but I'm working on a little project to redo the inside of the old Sportsman's into a lodging for the non-moneyed economy who comes into the area, providing to the area. I mean, it's like old shepherds, old cattlemen. That is their secret. So it's hard to say that it's just a bunkhouse. It's a program or a hope to turn I think it's number 45 Canal Street into a bunkhouse that's, sort of favors those who are like really not moneyed, but relate to the area. It's kind of hard to come back when everyone else, or an old place is not there anymore. And I think there are some people who sort of feel like the old places belong to their grandparents and great-grandparents, and they like to buy into the antiquity, to coming home. So it's I'm trying to say that there's that place in Prayerful Hopes for coming home, coming back into New England. It's kind of rough and old because you're nostalgic about the 1700s and 1800s, but I think it's a really strong place in our hearts, for belonging. So my project now is the bunkhouse, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Libby, for your heartfelt comments as always. Are there other members of the community that would like to speak tonight on something that is not listed on the agenda? Okay. Seeing no hands go up, we will move directly into our business for the evening. Our first order of business under item 6 is authorization for the town to join into multi-jurisdictional opioids litigation and ratification of attorney's retainer agreement. I want to kind of frame this a little bit and make some clarifications, and my frame is going to say that we are not going to enter into any formal votes this evening. There will be no decisions made at this meeting, but this meeting will be an opportunity for the board to discuss as community members, and for the community to discuss with the board kind of what's going on, what's been put out there, what our feelings are in general, and a formal action will be taken on this item next Tuesday, November 19th. So within that framework, I would open up the floor to a member of the board who might want to discuss this topic, who wants to kick it off.
Gosh. Not me.
Okay,
I certainly have some things to say, but
I will kick it off.
my voice is...
As people are probably aware or somewhat aware or have heard through the grapevine, Brattleboro has been offered opportunities. I say that because there are 2 opportunities on the table of lawsuits to join into. They are both at the national level. One affords us a little more identification as somebody special, meaning they actually care that there is a town named Brattleboro in Vermont involved in the lawsuit, and the other is more of just a mass communication. Our lawyer is not here tonight, so the way that we all speak on this board is about as slightly more educated in the sense that we've been in more meetings than members of the community, but otherwise we're just going to kind of be off the cuff. Yes, as you may have read, there are implications for pharmacies in both lawsuits, and here's what the role is that they're looking at. The best way I can describe it is I can compare it to my career in banking. When you are a bank teller or a customer service representative or anybody in that field who kind of sits in between higher up bank officers and customers, you have an obligation to be a whistleblower, which means you have an obligation to report if there's an internal member of the bank that's always kind of doing things that aren't considered norm. It's outside of your policy, it's outside of your training, and you have an obligation to report customers doing the same. Failure to do so is called willful blindness, and it carries heavy fines and it carries legal implications. A pharmacy has a similar role, to report doctors that seem to be writing a whole lot of things and to report clients who are maybe receiving things. When we're looking at pharmacies, we're not saying these pharmacies caused the crisis. We're saying, hey, were there policies in place, sort of like what I just described, and were they A, being followed, or were there B, actually none in place? There we have made no commitment to what pharmacies we're looking at and which pharmacies we're not. At this moment, we're looking at everybody in a discovery sense. We are not looking at anybody in a suing sense at this time at this table. Those are my clarifications. Any other board members want to jump in?
Well, I'll just say that I still feel very good about joining the original lawsuit that was framed in the newspaper, and I think a lot of people reacted to that, rightfully so perhaps, concerned for the locally owned pharmacies that we have here in town. And I made a statement that if we're going to look at any pharmacies, we had a moral obligation to look at all pharmacies. And through that look, I would hope that our local pharmacies have been doing due diligence, and they would therefore be exonerated to some extent. A lot of information has been flying around, and as Brandy stated, we don't have our attorney here to answer some final questions before taking a vote, so we feel, but other members can state their case, that it would be best to make our final decision next week, and we do have Bob Fisher with us. But I want to just personally say that I'm feeling like it is less likely that I'm going to support suing our local pharmacies, for the main reason that within this lawsuit there are quite a few, and it's 175 pages, and it's been a while since we've had it, so I have had a chance to read it all. Somebody asked me that question the other day. There's some pretty eye-opening examples of national pharmacies not following due diligence, and
That's
pretty...
a nice way of putting that. I was going to say disgusting examples. Carry
Yeah,
on.
eyebrow raising. Let's just put it that way from my verbiage. But the lawsuit, contrary to some initial reporting, I just want to point out that the lawsuit in Bennington does name a locally owned pharmacy in Bennington. However, that pharmacy and that pharmacy that's locally owned is not doesn't have specific examples listed like the national pharmacies do. So they're basically just grouped in with the other pharmacies. So when I look at these specific examples, to support suing our local pharmacies, I really feel like we have an obligation to be in a strong case, and the strong case rests with these specific examples that are documented, I think. So it makes the case actually weaker to include our local pharmacies from the information I have so far. And so that's why I'm leaning personally away from taking that action. Now, it remains to be seen if we should be including pharmacies at all, but we need to have that's sort of a two-step decision that we have to make, because that's a larger discussion to have. So that's my initial, before I lose my voice again.
I hear that.
Throw that out.
Thank you, Tim. Daniel?
Yeah, it is a really long document. You know, as Tim said, it's 175 pages long. And it's still available on the town website in the supporting documents section on the Selectboard page to look at. I think, like, if you're out there at home or you're in the audience tonight, or you're reading about it in the newspaper in a few days' time, it's important that you at least give it a glance. It's not actually that hard a document to read.
No.
It's not written in legalese. It's just kind of long. And it's long because it's looking at an entire supply chain from, manufacturer, distributor, pharmacy, benefits manager, and then I guess that's it. But for me, some parts that were important were at the beginning. There's some graphs with data on the number of dosage units of opioids that were. They're all different, right? Because it's distributors, manufacturers, retailers. But that's a document that shows that, we have Rite Aid on there, we have Hotel Pharmacy on there, we have Walgreens on there, we have Brattleboro Pharmacy, and we have some other people. And it doesn't indicate wrongdoing, but it also, I think, should ask us to do our due diligence as we're doing to make sure that we can, to the best of our knowledge, ascertain whether or not local pharmacies ought to be named in any lawsuit that we join. I'm downtown a lot, and I had 3 conversations in the space of about 15 minutes earlier this week from people in the community asking, are you really going to do this? And the answer I gave to them was, well, we're thinking about it, and we need to think about it, and we need to take it seriously. And we are taking it seriously, and it's probably frustrating for members of the public that we haven't taken any definitive action at this point. And I'm sorry that we're seems like we're kicking the can down the road, but behind the scenes, we're doing our homework and doing our due diligence, and I think it's really important that we do that. I also think that within that 175-page document, there are some places to look. I have a Selectboard Facebook page. I don't know if you guys know that. It's true.
No.
And I made a post on it the other day where I detailed some specific page numbers to take a look at, where it describes what the pharmacy's responsibilities are, what allegations have been made against pharmacies. Mostly, these are talking about national chains and talking about things that happened outside of the town of Brattleboro. And I think that folks taking a look at that so that they can kind of understand the picture will help us have a really good conversation in this town about whether this is the right thing to do. I'm taking my responsibility seriously, and I'm trying to the best of my ability, make the right call, but need to be informed. So the information is out there. Please take a look.
Thank you, Daniel. Liz?
I just wanted to mention that what I've gathered is these are shocking revelations, and we may or may not recoup some money. But I think what was made clear to me was one of the important parts of this litigation is to stop these practices from continuing. And I think it's very important that all of this is brought to light and all of this can stop. And I think that is one of the central goals of this litigation.
Thank you, Liz. David, do you have anything you want to add? You haven't spoken yet.
This is pretty.
It's up to you.
Yeah, these are pretty thorough comments. I don't know that there really is much I can add, except that the one organization that is still being left off the hook, and the one that gave birth to this problem, is the FDA, when in 2001 they, with no research evidence whatsoever, and for the first time in their history, with no research evidence whatsoever, approved the use of opiates for long-term treatment of pain. And that's what opened the floodgates, despite the fact that the FDA didn't do anything beyond that. Under pressure from the pharmaceutical industry, they made that finding, which opened the doors. And they're still being left off the hook. So
Thank you. Tim?
Do you mind if I say one more thing?
I don't, and then we'll go to but unless somebody else is wanting to say.
Thanks for pointing out that there are some more salient pages, but I thought I could get back to the why. Why would we be bothering to do this in the first place? Because I've seen that out there as sort of a sentiment. And just to add on to what David said, right around page 6, if you're following along at home, which is unlikely, but page 6, it's pointed out that Americans represent only 5% of the world's population, but we consume 80% of the world production of prescription opioids. And that's not because we are in more pain than the rest of the world. It's because it's been marketed to our part of the world, and successfully, possibly with some large organizations backing. The one part I wanted to just point out as part of the why we're doing this, and I'm going to substitute the town of Brattleboro in this. This is point 12 on page 5. So it says the town of Bennington, but I'll just say Brattleboro because it's true for us. The town of Brattleboro is now having to allocate substantial taxpayer dollars, resources, staff, energy, and time to address the damage the opioid scourge has left in its wake and to address its many casualties. Fire and emergency medical services are overutilized because of an increased number of opioid-related overdoses. The burden on law enforcement is substantially increased by opioid-related crimes related to prescription prescription opioid theft, diversion, and sales on the black market. Courts, social workers, schools, treatment centers, intervention programs, clinics, employee benefit plans, and others directly spending on opioids and opioid antagonists have all been harmed. Nearly every aspect of the town of Brattleboro's services and budget has been negatively and significantly impacted by this defendant aid epidemic. So I thought that was a pretty good paragraph to underline as to the why we're bothering with this.
Thank you for that, Tim. I'm going to open things up to the community, and I am going to echo Daniel's comments about, I would really encourage you to read this, even if you take it in bits and pieces and chunks, because reading this really brings it home for anybody who's too far away from the ground to feel like they fully can digest what's going on right now. At this time, I'd like to open the floor to members of the community that would like to speak on this topic. Who would like to go first? I thought people were going to be running for the mic. There we go.
Just
I was
put 'em to sleep.
braced.
Franz Reichsman, Brattleboro.
Hi, friends.
My opinion, which I've taken a number of years to come around to, is that as long as drugs are against the law, this problem will not be solved. If you go back 100 years to when they decided to make drinking alcohol against the law, you will see quite clearly that that did not work. And in fact, it spawned organized crime. It gave organized crime a foothold in this country that it did not have prior to that attempt. As well motivated as it may have been, although I do enjoy a glass of Pinot Noir now and again. So I really think that's the root cause here. If you're going to talk about root causes like the FDA not doing its job to review the change from acute to chronic pain, all that kind of stuff, I think that's interesting, but that's not the root cause as far as I'm concerned. The root cause is that if you're trying to make these things against the law, you're going to fail, and you're going to breed all the problems that go along with it. Opioids in and of themselves are not that harmful, considerably less harmful physiologically than either alcohol or tobacco. And there are known ways to maintain people on tolerable doses and allow people to lead productive lives, and some of those are being done, but not with nearly sufficient evidence, in my view. So I think this is an important discussion. Lawsuit, no lawsuit, fine. But I think people globally need to realize that, as Chris Rock once said, people want to get high. And if you think you can step in the way of that, you're fooling yourself. It's a natural human trait to want to change the way your brain works. 4-year-old kids spinning around to make themselves dizzy show us that that's what people like to do. And I just don't think you can fight it. So I would say a program similar to what was done with great success in Portugal is to decriminalize and treat and provide ways for people to lead productive lives, whether they take opioids or not. And I'm hoping that our society will move in that direction. Thank you.
Thanks, Franz. I happen to share your viewpoints. Other members of the community want to speak at this time on this topic? Yes, please.
Hello, HB Lizito, Brattleboro, District 2. One, there was a really great Wednesday humanities lecture at the library last week that I know was recorded by BCTV about this topic. That was really wonderful, so plug for checking that out if folks haven't seen it. And my other comment, I guess, is really a question, which, Brandy, you made a distinction between discovery and suing. And I know the lawyer's not here, so this may be a lawyer question, but if you could share with us more about the distinction between those two things and what the differences are in those processes and
Sure.
sort of what we might get out of each of those things.
Yeah, I'm going to tell you what I think the differences are, and then next week Bob can tell me in public that I was wrong or not wrong. Does that sound good? So in my perspective, Discovery is pure due diligence, right? Everybody's in the discovery phase, and then you hope that through the discovery, through what you discover, people who have no need to be remaining in the lawsuit drop off. Now, there's a legal term for that. I think it's dismissed from suit, but I'm not positive on that. And then at the end of discovery, you have your core people that clearly showed signs of either willful blindness or negligence. By people, I mean companies, and then you move forward with just that core group. It's really kind of, in my moral opinion, bad practice to enter into discovery saying, we're only going to investigate you guys because you're not local and we believe in our local. I will tell you that my deep hope and sincere belief is that through the discovery process, that local, pharmacies, they come in, they pass the green light check, they're dropped out, and we're left with a smaller subset who either don't have the correct policies in place or are showing willful blindness or negligence to said policies that are in place. And then we move forward with the suit with those. Bob, feel free to correct me publicly next week. Thank you. Are there further public community comments on this topic? It will be back on the agenda next week. We will take a formal vote, and the reason that I'm saying it's definitely next week is because I believe we have until November 23rd. 22nd to opt out of one of the national suits. That's more of just the mass suit. And since next week's meeting is the 19th, that's really like the end-all, be-all for our opportunity to take formal action.
Maybe we could say for the public's benefit, like what the difference between these two suits is, just in summary, like.
We can pretend to. So this is what I don't know.
Want me to describe it?
Let's let Peter try.
So the suit that we first became involved with, and as you've heard tonight, it's not fully formed yet in how it would be filed on behalf of Brattleboro, but there's a really good example of how it's likely to be filed. It's the one that everybody's been referring to that was filed on behalf of Bennington. That suit is a national scale suit being pursued by a group of attorneys who are representing individual entities, dozens if not hundreds of individual entities across the country, but they are filing an individual lawsuit on behalf of each plaintiff, and there's data that's relevant to each individual lawsuit that is specific to the community that lawsuit speaks to. So Bennington's lawsuit is speaking to Bennington's impacts, and Brattleboro's lawsuit at the time that it would be filed would speak to Brattleboro's impacts. While we've been working on defining how that might move forward, and there's been a much work done by the members of the select board and very thorough research being done by Bob Fisher, the town attorney, and advice that's being provided to the board about this. While that's been unfolding, about 10 days or so ago, we got a letter from the Attorney General, Vermont Attorney General, advising all municipalities in Vermont that there's a national suit related to opioids that is been filed or is being filed that is a class action suit that includes, as a class, all municipal governments across the country, unless you choose to opt out of that litigation by November 22nd. What the town is weighing, and what Bob Fisher will provide further advice about, and the board will make a decision about a week from tonight, is does it make sense to continue on in both of these, along both of these avenues, or does it make sense to pick one and not the other? I think it's all but certain that we're going to be involved in opioids litigation of one type or another. Yes. But the significant difference between the two is the class action suit speaks with one voice to all of the municipalities and very broad impacts to communities across the country, which means we also not only have a less specific, a case that is less specific to Brattleboro circumstances, but also much less say in ultimately how that moves forward, versus the other suit that is more individually tailored to Brattleboro's impacts, and on which Brattleboro would have some significant say in how it moves forward, how it is pressed on by the attorneys. It still would be a very large-scale case. It's still in a court, I believe it's called the Multi-District Litigation Court out in Ohio, that deals with these kinds of federal lawsuits when there's a bunch of different locations that are involved, but it would be more specific to our impacts and our desires for how this might move forward.
Does that feel helpful as much as it can be without Bob being here? Does that open up any questions from members of the community? I still want to give another chance to speak, and we also will speak on it next week as well. But just know that when we speak on it next week, we're going to have to take an action regarding opting out of the more mass suit. Okay. Seeing no further comments from anybody on this topic, I am going to go ahead and move forward. And our next topic moves us right into the budget. The blue binder. Budget season kicks off officially. Take it away, Peter.
Thank you, Brandy. So, for those who don't have the blue binder, I want to just remind everybody how you can follow along. If you haven't yet, people out in the community, if you haven't yet gone and taken a look at the proposed budget, you can do that, and you could do it in real time tonight as we're talking about it.
Is it also on the desk up here with Jan? If you're
It is for those people in the room, yes.
Perfect.
There is some information there. That's not the whole budget.
But the entire
It is one
budget.
copy of the whole budget.
No, all right.
Okay.
No, that's what's in the binder.
Both sides.
Yes, it's double sided.
Got it. Okay, that's why it's thin. So yes, there are handouts being passed around to those who are in the room. For those of you at home, if you go to the town's website at brattleboro.org, on the right-hand side of the homepage, there's an area called News. It has several things listed there, one of which is FY21 proposed budget. If you click on that, it takes you to a page that has a number of different documents. This evening, we're going to be talking about the budget message and the proposed budget, the first and the third links that are on that landing page. And specifically, within the proposed budget, we'll be talking about the revenues for all different departments, as well as the proposed expenditures for the Public Works Department and the Recreation and Parks Department. But first, and I'm going to try not to go on and on and on.
Line.
Often, let me say this in my own defense ahead of time, that it is normal that on the first regular meeting in November, I present the budget and summarize it so that everybody has an opportunity to kind of think about this particular year's proposed budget in the big picture before we start talking about details. We had a situation last week where we had only 3 select board members, and so as you know, there were a number of different items that got rolled over to this week, including the one we just talked about, and 2 more that'll come up later on the agenda. And the budget overview was deferred as well. So tonight, I'm going to try to move quickly through the overview, but I think it's important that we actually do provide this summary because it is the broad context within which we'll talk specifically about those revenues and about 2 of the departments this evening and about all the other departments as we go forward in the weeks ahead. So I'll start by saying that when we presented the long-term financial plan about 2.5 months ago, we forecasted at that time that we thought we would be proposing approximately a 4.4 cent increase in the property tax rate or a 3.5% increase in the property tax rate for FY21. And we're pleased that through a combination of identifying conservatively, without getting reckless about it, some ways in which we think that non-tax revenue will increase in FY21, and also identifying $75,000 worth of savings compared to the expenditures that we were forecasting at that time. Our work in going from the forecast into the detailed budget has got us to a place where we are proposing a budget that would result in a 3.3 cent increase or a 2.5% increase in the property tax rate. Within that, there are some significant expenses nonetheless, even though we're pleased that we've been able to reduce the overall impact from what we had anticipated. There still are some significant individual items that are up. One that we'd like to call specific attention to because it will be discussed a little bit later this evening as we go through the Public Works budget and is something that we think there is a ready longer-term solution for in terms of relieving property tax burden is stormwater management. So the state of Vermont has passed a series of measures over the last few years that have significantly increased the burden to local governments and others for stormwater management, for drainage systems that take stormwater that falls and handles it in ways that are more sophisticated than simply channeling it off into the nearest stream. And so while these are best practices, this is good for the environment. Nobody's quibbling about the fact that it's the right thing to do. In fact, this is catching up to regulations that exist in a lot of other states already and have for quite a few years. The impact to the cost of providing local government services is significant, and we knew that it would be. We now are starting to be able to put real numbers to that concern. And in this budget, we're requesting that you fund $60,000 worth of additional expenses. We've always had some expenses in the Public Works budget related to stormwater management, but because of the additional requirements and the things we need to do to meet the state mandate, we're asking for $60,000 of additional funding in particular ways that Steve Barrett will speak to in a little while. The good news part of this story, other than the positive benefit for the environment, is that we've learned at Town Fair this year of a mechanism that other communities have used that is very applicable to Brattleboro circumstances because of Interstate 91. To address the things that other communities have used to address this sort of significant new burden. And it's called a stormwater utility. So we're all very familiar with the water and sewer utility in town, where there's a separate enterprise fund, fees that are paid related to water and sewer consumption in town are what pays for the operations of our water and sewer services rather than taxes and general revenues. A stormwater utility functions the same way, but the basis for the calculation of the fee that is paid by an individual consumer of stormwater services is the amount of impervious surface that they have within their facility. So think of the difference, for instance, between an undeveloped parcel that's mostly grass versus a shopping center that has a large expanse of asphalt on it. They might be similar sized parcels, but they have very different impacts on stormwater management. One of the most significant type of facility that impacts drainage in our communities is roadways. The town obviously has control over significant amounts of impervious areas in our roadways, but so does the state of Vermont. I-91 runs through Brattleboro, and so what we've learned is there is an agreement that's been reached. There was actually the potential for some litigation around this. That litigation was avoided, and it's already a settled matter between the state of Vermont and the currently 5 municipalities that have stormwater utilities, that while the state is a tax-exempt organization, it is not exempt from paying fees into a stormwater utility, that it contributes to the problem in the same way that other owners of impervious surfaces contribute to the problem, and that the state should pay its fair share. And so in the case of Colchester, Vermont, which is the community that actually made the presentation at Town Fair about how they went about setting up their stormwater utility and why they did that, there's actually a very substantial amount. I think they said 40%, but some significant portion of the fees for their stormwater utility are being paid by the state of Vermont. And we think that while there's a lot of technical work that would need to be done and will need to be done around this to come forward with a more specific plan for how we would set up a stormwater utility and what those fees would look like, it's likely that a significant percentage would also be paid by the state of Vermont and Brattleboro because of I-91. And just for context, I won't say anything more about it tonight than this. It's probably more detailed than you actually needed on stormwater, and I'm not keeping my promise to be quick already. But
Nobody believed it.
Pardon?
I said nobody believed that promise.
Thanks. But just for homeowners' perspective, the residential rate that Colchester charged when they opened up their stormwater utility was $45 per residential property per year. So if it was done based on property value, then large shopping centers would certainly pay a much greater percentage than a homeowner, an individual homeowner, but the state would be paying zero, and individual homeowners would be paying more likely a share that would be greater than the $45. By addressing this as an impervious surface based fee structure, there's an inherent fairness to those that contribute more to the problem pay a higher percentage of the costs. And we'll be back with a lot more information about this in the future. For this year, in this proposed budget, general revenues are going to have to support the additional expenses that we're going to be talking about later on tonight, because it takes a while to do this. You got to bring on some technical assistance, do some studies about impervious area, and go through all the legal processes of setting up a new utility. So it's going to take us months to do this, but we would hope that perhaps by this time next year, and certainly by 2 years out, we'd be in a position where we would actually have created a stormwater utility and would no longer be burdening property taxpayers with this particular cost.
Wonderful.
Right now, for the proposed budget that's before you, property taxes amount to 82.5% of the total revenues. We've been through many times before about the limitations of being in a Dillon's Rule state and the need for a greater diversity of funding sources. I won't go further into that right now. I will say that a year ago, the proposed budget was at 86%, and the reason that it is lower is because of the recommendation by the Select Board and the approval by town meeting to create the 1 cent sales tax as part of the FY20 budget that is currently being implemented, relieving some of the property tax burden. And so what's before you, as 82.5% would come from property taxes. Going to what are the sort of major impacts on the expense side? The major impacts primarily are personnel-related costs this year. We have come out of the negotiation of collective bargaining agreements, and so pay and benefits are increasing. Between that and the creation of additional positions, the sustainability coordinator position is now shown in employee pay and benefits rather than as a straight $100,000 other expenses line item. Because of the fact that it has been approved as a position, and we're actually in the final stages of the recruitment for that position. So now those expenses, all but about $10,000, so about $90,000 worth of that is showing in the personnel costs rather than in operating costs. So overall, the pay and benefits of town employees are proposed to increase by slightly over $500,000 or 4.8%. And just for reference, the impact of that a year ago was substantially less than that because we were not creating new positions in the budget and we were not implementing the first year coming out of collective bargaining agreements and adjustments to the compensation structure for town employees. We'll have a little more detail on that in a moment. The impact of all other categories of expenditure is actually a reduction of 2.5%, or about $185,000 compared to last year's budget. We'll go through revenues in great detail later on, so I'll just say for now that overall the revenues of the town, general revenues for the general fund, are proposed to increase by $317,000. That's 1.8%. That the total revenues are predicted to go up. And the property tax portion of that is, as I said, a 2.5% or 3.3 cent increase. The impact of that, actually 3.26 cent increase, would be $32.60 for the whole year, or $8.15 per quarter per $100,000 of property value. Quickly summarizing the other categories of revenue, rooms and meals taxes are proposed to increase by $20,000 compared to the FY20 budget. That is simply to take it to the actual level of collections from the FY19 budget. The FY19 year closed on June 30th. We know what we collected at that time. It was approximately $440,000. So the budget in this category last year was $420,000. We've proposed to increase it to $440,000, which is essentially level. The same is true for sales tax, except that it's a different reason. So the calculations that were done as part of the adoption of that tax last year indicated that we could reasonably expect about $630,000 worth of revenue. We're hopeful that internet sales and other factors may actually cause that number to be higher, but we don't have any real experience with it yet. We still don't have any real experience with it. It's the very early goings. We've got partial receipts for the months so far in this fiscal year. So without a basis to offer you any trend information on that, we've simply recommended that it be funded at, or be budgeted at $630,000 again this year.
That seems reasonable.
Level from last year. The transfer from other funds, this is the money that is paid from the utility enterprise fund and the parking enterprise fund into the general fund in recognition of services like accounting and dispatch and other administrative oversight or legal services that are provided to the enterprise funds by the general fund. We received $330,000 in the current fiscal year in those transfers, and using the same formula for calculating the impact of those services, we are proposing to increase that line item by $10,000, so the transfer from the enterprise funds to the general fund this year would be $340,000. Use of fund balance. There's a calculation that we do that we'll go into greater detail later on around maintaining the 10%. There's a guideline that was adopted years ago by the Select Board to set aside 10% of the unassigned fund balance in the general fund for unexpected expenses or some situations like Tropical Storm Irene, to be able to have some flexibility in those dire circumstances. Having set aside that 10%, we had about $231,000 available to be used for as a use of fund balance in this budget, and we're proposing that $223,000 be used as a transfer to the capital equipment account, and that'll pay for approximately 40% of the cost of replacing a 1994 fire engine.
Peter, do you mind if I ask, can you throw out the number for the 10%, where that lands us right now?
Yes, I can. I need to just go to a different part of the same document.
It's just great to have that number.
$1.8 million.
Yes, it is. So there's the 10%.
On page 7.
Thank you.
10% figure is $1,816,262. And we currently have $2,047,513 of unassigned fund balance. And so when you subtract the 1.8 from the 2.0, what's left is $231,251 available for transfer, and we're proposing to use all but about $8,000 of that.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Other revenue is just what it says. It's lots of relatively smaller sort of miscellaneous items that don't fall into one of the major categories. There's two things I'd like to call out. While overall there's an increase from $1.549 million to $1.576, a relatively modest increase, a relatively significant number. There are two smaller impacts that I think are worthy of note. One is a $20,000 increase in voluntary fees paid in lieu of taxes, which is an area where we've been working to try to create some additional revenue. Frankly, the climb is steep and slippery for that because of the fact that we just don't have any authority within which to require people who are tax exempt to make a pilot payment. But we have had a couple of situations over the last couple of years where people have agreed voluntarily to do that, and that has increased the expected revenue in that line item by $20,000. And in addition to that, in the collective bargaining agreements with the employees, one of the things that changed this year, we talked about it quite extensively when you were approving the renewal of the health insurance program about a month ago, is that employees will be making a contribution to the cost of the premiums for health insurance. And in this first year of reintroducing an employee contribution, the total expected amount of that is about $20,000. So we've created a new revenue line item that shows that $20,000. The town will pay the full amount of the premium, and that will receive from the employees as payroll deductions an amount that we expect will be about $20,000.
I noticed that. Do you mind if I throw out a...
No, please.
Is that sort of the proper place to put that? I mean, it seems odd to me to consider that revenue when it's sort of
So we
a
believe that
donation
it is for the.
into,
I'm sorry.
and I'm not saying it's the wrong thing, it's just my brain has trouble with thinking of that as revenue because it's a cost share almost.
It is, but because the town provides the benefit and pays the bills to Blue Cross,
Keeps it
we
cleaner.
do think it's appropriate, rather than showing a smaller cost from the town, which would, when you think about future years and looking back at histories of budgets and properly reflecting the town's finances, we think the full cost of the premium ought to be reflected there, and the amount of the employee contribution ought to be reflected as a revenue that the town receives to help pay for the paying of the premiums.
Okay. Does that also show up on the breakout for health insurance as a revenue line item, or is this where the only place it will appear is in other revenue, under revenues?
When we go through revenues, I'll
show up.
point out the specific location where it sits within those. There's not really a health insurance revenue line item because up
Right.
until now there hasn't been health insurance revenue.
Yeah.
Not since 2012 in Brattleboro.
Okay. Just trying to make sure it's clear to everybody following along and
Yeah.
kind of makes sense.
Yeah, and actually, just kind of put the point on it, and that's why we think this is the proper way to show it, is for exactly that reason, so that it is clear. In future years, there'll actually be larger contributions made by the employees in accordance with the ramping up that's provided for in the collective bargaining agreements, and we think it's appropriate that that be readily identifiable in the budget.
Thank you.
Switching to expenditures, again, obviously it's a balanced budget, so the expenditures overall are proposed to increase by the same amount as the revenue, $317,426, or 1.8%. Staffing, I've mentioned the collective bargaining agreements for the non-union employees. So the collective bargaining agreements have a variety of provisions that we're adhering to in the proposal that's before you. And then for non-union employees, there's two separate things going on here. One is that we've projected a 2% across the board pay increase. That's the standard amount that we've had in recent years. It has some years been just slightly higher than inflation, and other years been just slightly lower than inflation. And we don't have any reason based on financial forecasts to believe that next July will be in a different circumstance than what we've been in for these last several years. So we think 2% across the board pay increase for non-union employees is an appropriate prediction. But in addition to that, as you're well aware, we've been looking into the equity of the pay for non-union positions, both in and of themselves, sort of in the marketplace, and to a greater degree, specifically in comparison to union positions, comparable union positions here in the town. We are receiving advice on that, outside advice about how to make the determinations of what appropriate adjustments might look like. We're not ready to bring all that forward to you yet, but we needed to bring forward a budget. And so what I've done as what I think is a responsible placeholder, but I would ask that neither the board nor the public believe that this is an estimate, because we don't have anything yet on which to base an estimate. But I think it's a responsible placeholder to have $30,000 set aside as a potential salary increase line item. My intent is to come back to you in the weeks ahead with specific recommendations about what to do about non-union employee pay, and to implement whatever may come from that, to implement that while we're still in this fiscal year, subject to the full final work around it, to be able to bring it to you and recommend a certain specific set of adjustments and the justification for those, and have your review of that and your input from the public and from the employees. When we come to an endpoint of that, if we arrive at a place where you do believe that adjustments are appropriate, I think we should make those adjustments during FY20 that we're in right now. And what this $30,000 will do is be a placeholder in order to absorb at least, perhaps all of it, perhaps more than all of it, perhaps at least most of it, of the FY21 impact of what you ultimately decide. The FY20 impact, of course, would be, by the time it gets implemented, likely less than half of the total annual impact, because we'll be likely into the new year and more than halfway through the fiscal year. Also, as I mentioned before, the sustainability coordinator position was created but not shown in the current year budget as salary and related benefits, but rather as a $100,000 climate protection line item. So what's proposed in this budget is putting those expenses where they belong as part of the planning department budget, which is why you see salaries and planning going up very substantially. But then in the auxiliary services area of the town's budget, there's a line item for climate protection that we have zeroed out. Within the planning department, we also have included some funding so that the overall funding for the position would still be $100,000. But some of that would be in salary and benefits, and some of that would be in operating expenses that could be used in support of the operation of that, the functioning of that position, and some of the community activities that we anticipate they'll be coordinated. We also are proposing something in this budget that is new, and we'll talk about in detail when Steve Barrett is presenting the DPW budget shortly, which is seasonal staffing. There's, I believe, $24,000 that we have proposed for that. And that's very important based on, we've been really responsive in recent years to, we should do a little more of this, we should do a little more of that. We need to make sure that something happens, spring and fall, not just once a year. One example is the seasonal speed humps that were installed as a pilot this year on Guilford Street. Very successful outcome, but it's a tremendous workload to install those in the spring and pull them out in the fall so we're ready for plowing. And so things like that and other details that Steve will be able to speak to really require that we bring on some summer help for the highway crews. We have had that for years in Recreation and Parks, and it's a really important part of the work that gets done by that unit, by the Parks Maintenance Unit. And in the DPW, for many years in the past, there was seasonal staffing. It has now been many years since that was eliminated. And we just feel as though unless we're prepared to dial back some of the increased level of service that we're providing, that we really are going to need some hands on deck. This is very inexpensive labor. It's high school and college kids that come on and work side by side with the town's regular employees to provide these seasonal services.
Inexpensive, but fairly paid?
Well,
yes.
they work
Yeah.
less hours, probably.
So I guess let's leave a deeper dive on
sure.
that for when we talk about non-union salaries. I would suggest there's a substantive difference between a student providing summer labor who's going to be certainly paid in accordance with all the applicable rules, but not necessarily with the same, from the same point of view in terms of determining what's fair for such a person. The marker, I think, is going to be a different place from those employees who serve us year-round, but part-time, and are a large part of the reason why we're doing the review at all about non-union pay. So there's a really significant issue that's been raised about certain part-time employees and about certain supervisory employees. And we'll get to all of that. I think that there's a less compelling argument to be made about increasing the pay for seasonal employees, but we'll address it. We'll bring that forward. Moving to employee benefits, we have great news about the health insurance program. So relatively speaking,
I don't know.
Relatively speaking, because of the forecasted increases being 10%, and because we're actually coming in at 7.7, actually, I'm sorry, no, take that back. It was 7.7 a year ago. Because we're actually coming in at 3.1. The increase is still, because it is one of our largest categories of expenditure, or accounting for almost 12%. It's 11.9% of the expenditure budget that pays for the health insurance program. So, each dollar there is a lesser percentage than in many of the other categories. So we still have an increase of $101,000. It's almost a penny. I'm not suggesting that it comes free, What I would suggest is that a 3.1% increase
Yeah.
in the current marketplace, especially compared to what we had anticipated,
Yeah.
is a great place to be.
Yeah.
So that's what's reflected in the budget as compared to a $234,000 7.7% increase a year ago. So an entirely different reduced order of magnitude. But in addition to that, when you add the contribution that is being made by the employees into the mix, the taxpayers' cost of providing these services goes down, or doesn't go down, but it goes up by an even lesser amount.
The increase is smaller than we thought.
The
it was
increase
gonna be.
is already smaller than we thought in toto, and then it's even smaller than that for taxpayers because of the fact that employees will be making a contribution. Risk management is an unequivocally good story. So in an area where we knew we had a problem, we identified in the comprehensive review of town operations several years ago that our cost of workers' compensation was increasing far too rapidly. And it was in part because of some things beyond our control out in the marketplace, but in large part because our experience modification, which is insurance talk for how our claims compare to average claims for employers of our size and type out in the world. Our experience modification for several years in a row was above 1, sometimes well above 1, and 1.0 means we're exactly average. And so we were compounding the impact of a hardened insurance market by imposing even greater costs on ourselves because we needed to improve our practices around workers' comp. We identified that as a need. We identified some ways to do that. We implemented some significant changes in our workers' comp policies, our administration of it, as well as, primarily there were two things: some additional safety procedures to help people not get injured as often, and some best practices for getting people back to work quicker. We were having instances where people would go out on workers' comp and stay out longer than necessary, where they could come back maybe on light duty within their department, or maybe to provide a service that was less demanding within a different department for a period of time while they were getting healthy again, and then go back to their normal job. The data shows in the field that the sooner you get somebody back to work, not only do you save cost for the taxpayers, but you actually have longer-term better outcomes for the employees. An employee who is sitting home receiving workers' comp doesn't have as good long-term recovery and experience with its employer, with their employer, as those who come back quicker and are able to contribute in some manner, even if it's a different way than they usually contribute to the cause. And so we implemented those things. For a couple of years, we've had really unsatisfying results where we've had to say to you, the premiums related to this kind of insurance are based on multi-year averages, and even though we are really feeling good about the changes that we've made, we can't really show you good outcomes yet financially. This is the year when it's paying dividends, and we can say it is paying off. So our workers' comp renewal and our property liability insurance renewal for this year is flat compared to last year at $840,000. For the workers' comp part, it's because our experience modification went down below 1 for the first time in several years. We were at 0.94, meaning we were 6% better than average in our experience related to claims. So in that area, we're really pleased with the results, and it's got a nice impact to the budget, which is no increase.
Very nice.
Department expenses are those costs that are not part of the staffing for departments, but are other parts of department operations. So buying fuel and maintaining vehicles and maintaining equipment and other sorts of things related to the provision of services. And so the overall increase this year is a little higher than what we've seen in this area in recent years, and I can explain why. The total increase in department expenses is $101,000, proposed to be $101,015, a slightly over 5% increase. But major contributors to those include the additional costs for the stormwater that I talked about before, which is up to $84,500 from $24,500 last year to $84,500 this year. So that's that $60,000 increase that we talked about. That's not including the cost of labor, by the way, and when we create the stormwater utility, we'll be able to factor in the cost of labor into that fee structure, so you can see, begin to see that it have a really significant impact upon property taxes. So that's the major driver. There are two other things that are worth calling out. One is an increase in cost for elections. It's only $8,000, but we've made commitments to do childcare, and last year we provided food at the town meeting. I think that it was widely appreciated, not just appreciated. My sense and the comments I got back was keeping people on the premises and feeding them.
Yeah.
Pizza?
Yeah.
At the end.
Yeah, well, it enabled us, we had pizza and then we went back to work. It enabled us to stay on task and get the work done instead of having a dinner break where we might have had trouble raising a quorum after dinner. So there's a public purpose to be served by this.
Well, we shouldn't have gone that long.
Well, that's a different question.
That's a different.
We did go that long, and so people were getting hungry. And so the point is, we've increased the elections budget by $8,000 to cover
I
the
enjoyed
cost
the pizza.
of childcare and food if necessary at town
Good.
meeting.
Okay. Good.
And it was a nice goodwill gesture.
Yes.
And I was hungry.
Widely well received. And then finally, there's an increase of about $20,000 in the police budget. We'll go over that in more detail another night when it's the police department's turn to present to you. But basically, that's not really a definable, you can point to this and say that's what caused it. There's a variety of different relatively small increases, but because that's a large department with a large number of line items, it represents a $20,000 increase out of the $101,000 total. We will talk in great detail next week about capital equipment and capital projects. So for tonight, I'll simply summarize that we are proposing an increase in the funding for capital equipment and a decrease in the funding for capital projects. Both are very significant magnitude, and we hope, for reasons that I think you would probably appreciate me describing next week rather than tonight.
Yes, please.
Doing it all over again next week. We hope this will be the last time that there is such a wild variation in these, because in accordance with the 25-year capital equipment plan that we've unveiled last year, updated this year, and that we'll describe in great detail next week, we believe that relatively level funding of equipment is the way to go. It has benefits for the taxpayers, removing the spikes. Because it removes the spikes on the equipment side, it allows us to focus with greater clarity on the needs on the projects side, and it will keep our rolling stock, our vehicles and our large equipment items in better working order, rather than replacing things as they are failing, which is both an operationally poor way to go about it and a very costly, more costly way to go about it than planning well and implementing replacements when either there is substantial trade-in value or when something is approaching the end of its life rather than having failed. So we'll get back to that in greater detail next time. We'll also be talking, and this is an important foreshadowing, I think, just to mention, on the capital project side, with that greater degree of clarity that we're able to focus on, what the needs are for capital projects. We've been able to identify that we don't think that generational needs, we've been talking for years about some very substantial things that need to happen up at Memorial Park and some very substantial work that needs to be done to either upgrade or replace the Public Works facility. We don't think either one of those, and certainly not the two together, can be accomplished within the cash expenditures for capital, within our ability to pay as we go. And in each case, we're talking about investments that are likely to have a decades-long impact, probably something on the order of 40 or 50 years, given the history of the last time that these kinds of major investments were made at those facilities. So we'll have a lot more detail to share in the future. Right now, it's just a heads up that we do intend to develop a plan where we can propose to you a bond that would pay for those projects that would be not issued for a couple of years out yet. We talk about it related to the debt service expenses. There's an opportune moment coming, I believe it's in 2023, I'll get there in just a moment, when having paid off some prior borrowing, there'll be an opportunity to take on some new debt and not have it have as significant of an impact to the taxpayers. It'll allow us to move forward with those very significant generational improvements for those two departments. And it will allow us then to keep up with the recurring capital project needs for paving and sidewalks and some other things like that, using the cash that's available in the operating budget. Debt service is in fact the next item. It's proposed to decrease this year by $185,000 or 12%. There's another significant decrease like that that's coming about 2 years out. And the combination of those, we think, positions us well to take on the additional debt for the projects I mentioned.
Are these debts generally fixed rate?
Yes, they
They're
are.
all muni bonds or
They are
mostly?
almost always municipal bonds. When they're not municipal bonds, they are, in this case, for the kinds of borrowing we're talking about for facilities of this scale, they would be bonds. In some cases, most recent example would be the half of the cost of the aerial ladder truck for the fire department. That was over $1 million to buy the vehicle.
Yep.
We borrowed, I believe it was $550,000 for that. It might have been $500,000. When we borrowed that, it's a 10-year borrowing, but instead of being a bond, because of the smaller scale of that, it's actually a bank note.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. But it is a fixed rate bank note,
Yep.
and it does come tax exempt borrowing because we're a municipality.
Thank you.
Other expenses, the catch-all for everything that doesn't fit into one of the major categories. We have an overall decrease in that category of about $76,000 or 6.6%, and that is almost entirely due to the $100,000 climate protection line item that has now moved over into salaries and benefits in the planning department. There's a couple of other things referenced there as part of the change within that area of expenditure. So that's an increase in Rescue Inc.'s fees and the cost of, we put a new $10,000 line item for seasonal maintenance of the porta potties and other health-related services. We think that was a success this summer in dealing with some of the challenges out in the community. It was good for public health, and it was good for the people who needed a place to go to the bathroom. And so we don't see any reason, I wish we did, but we don't, to expect that we won't need to do that again next summer. Our expectation is we should learn from the success of that. It was a relatively modest expense at about $10,000, but it was unbudgeted this year, so we're proposing a $10,000 line item to carry that cost for next year.
And proposing that does not mean that we're not still looking at ideas to have actual permanent facilities
Right. So
year-round around the town.
That's for sure. What I would say is those are going to be major capital investments. So,
Right.
you know, what we've seen so far, there's nothing for less than $100,000. Most of them are well north of that. The really sort of what we see so far from our research is the best available that has, it's basically all stainless steel. It's easy to wash down. It's durable. It's going to last for a long time. Those can run $250,000.
Okay.
So that's obviously a longer-term solution.
Yep.
We can provide this service at 3 locations in town where we had success with it this summer. We could do that again next year for $10,000.
Great, thank you for letting us ask that question.
Sure. Yeah. Ask any question. That's what we're here for.
I know, I'm just absorbing tonight.
And that's it for the financial numbers. We've been through the funded balance piece. I'd just say we also each year just summarize where we are with personnel complement. We have increased from 116 to 117 full-time employees because of the creation of the sustainability coordinator. So we're at 117 full-time employees and 10 part-time employees in the general fund, supplemented in some departments by on-call or seasonal employees. And there are 21 other, we often talk about the town staffing as being about 140 employees, and that's because there are 21 other full-time employees that are funded through the enterprise funds. Happy to answer any questions or move on into revenue.
A couple questions. One about the fund balance. When we formalized this as a guideline, I think it was 5 or 6 years ago, and the budget was around $15 million, and we accepted the Vermont League of Cities and Towns recommendation that we set aside 10%. That's an arbitrary guideline, clearly. But $1.5 million seemed like a good idea. We'd recently had the Irene experience, and we were really glad to have had some money in the bank. So we accepted that. And I think as I look back at it now, the purpose of this is for non-recurring expenses. But it continues to increase every year. And from where we started, around 15 million up to now 18 million, it's like 16 to 18% increase. But it hasn't gone up because of the non-recurring expenses we might need to spend it on. It's gone up because salaries have gone up. That's a recurring.
Right.
Health costs have gone up, and we have added purposefully to the capital the amount of spending that we do based on revenue for capital projects. So I'm wondering if it makes sense to just stick with that 10% arbitrary guideline for non-recurring costs when and continue to let it go up on a percentage basis rather than just setting it for a few years at 1.5 million. And so I'd like us to think about that, or maybe you and John and Patrick talk about it, think about it, and say why that might not be a good idea.
Sure.
But the main reason I'm asking that is the second thing that I noticed under the capital projects, there's nothing in there for the pool. And
That's correct.
And for the uninitiated, I can't remember how many years ago it was, but Carol might remember exactly, that we were presented with 3 things that needed to happen at the pool.
Right.
One was the leaks, we fixed those, and one was
Yep.
the damage to the deck
Yes.
and the condition of the deck, and the third was the pool house.
Yes.
And the pool house was always put off because it was the most expensive. And I'm not sure that I could find, if I look back through all the years, I could find a capital plan that actually listed the pool house specifically on there.
Right.
But there was a clear intention that sometime in the next few years, we wanted to try and fit that in there. And I was just looking, and it's not in the capital budget in the foreseeable future. And this is a facility, aside from the fact that it's really old and really dingy, it also is a facility that's used by young children primarily. We provide a lot of services for young children through the rec department, but I think the pool may be the one that gets the most use. And particularly our most vulnerable children. And the pool and the park is where they get their lunch. I'm not sure if they get breakfast too or not. Yeah, breakfast and lunch now through the obviously through the school and the town services. And it's a really important component, and it's a long-standing promise that was going to be fixed. And if we went from, we've got 2 million, and instead of putting 10%, 1.8 in, we put 1.5 in, we would have another $250,000 or so. And I don't know if that's enough for the pool house or not, but it certainly would be a down payment on it. So it's really 2 things. One is that I would like to see that pool house in this year, and we find a way to do it, and to just reconsider the way we view the fund balance.
So I'd like to suggest that the pool conversation occur during the capital
When Carol
discussion
can-
next
yeah,
week so that it
okay.
could be in the fuller context of the other capital needs.
Sure.
I think that's the appropriate time for that one. And we also would be happy to bring you back a more formal, more complete response if the board is interested in that regarding the fund balance. But I can tell you just as a quick summary answer to that, I wouldn't recommend, I would recommend that you not set a dollar amount, particularly one below what's here, and then have that be the dollar amount target as opposed to a percentage target. And the reason why is, while you're right that the specific calculation is increased over time based on expenses that aren't really the
Exactly.
primary purpose for setting aside the money, they serve as a proxy. So you're equally right that 10% is not a magical number, it's the town's number. It could be 20%, it could be 5%. But by having it be a percent, it just reflects that over time, the costs of things increase. So if we had Irene today, the cost of recovering from exactly the same impacts from Irene would be greater today than they were 8 years ago. And so the standard, the financial best practices is pick a number, pick a percentage that you can live with, and use that percentage as your guideline. And frankly, our 10% marker is low. From the potential threats that we face with increasing frequency of storms, some of our fellow municipalities up in northern Vermont got that lesson on Halloween Day when
And another one yet today.
they're getting snow today, but they had some real damage from floods on Halloween Day. And so to be ready for those kinds of moments, I think it's prudent that we not dip below 10%, and that if anything, we consider that maybe over the longer term, and I'm not suggesting this for any time soon because we've got other needs we're trying to address, but over the longer term, a higher percentage than 10% would be more prudent and not abnormal. And if you'd like to see some data about, how our 10% reflects, or relates to, other communities, I'd be happy to bring you that comparative data.
And this is inflation plus climate change based?
So the best practice of having a certain amount of unassigned fund balance set aside isn't just for natural disasters. It is for natural disasters, for economic crises. If 2008 happens again, and property values were to dive, and
A
therefore
roof caves
property
in,
taxes were to be reduced substantially. Those are the kinds of things you protect yourself against unexpected, significant negative financial impacts. Most often, the way we see that come to pass is through a natural disaster of some sort, but it can be other things as well. And it can be actually, so again, Steve would be in a better position to speak to this than I, and probably next week would be a better night than tonight. But we got a lot of retaining walls around town, right? And they're not young, and some of them are not in great shape. And so we don't really have a retaining wall replacement program because those walls typically last for, sometimes 100 years or more. And so the kind of expense that they represent, budgeting for them to go rip out a wall that isn't failing, to put in a modern wall probably doesn't make sense. But when one of those starts to fail, that's a hundreds of thousands of dollars immediate urgent expense that we need to take care of. So,
And we've seen that happen.
and we have seen that happen.
The $10,000 for the porta potties, which also kind of is about public health. The impact of our current public health crisis could be compared to like an Irene or climate change or an economic, crash. And I know that in some ways, like the impact on the town, it's reflected in line items in various different departments' budgets. But maybe there's something to be said for, I don't know, looking at that line item and thinking whether or not we're planning for actually contributing to the solution of of those problems in our budget, and sort of, or at least planning for that kind of like level of crisis. That if the 10% of fund balance is in part an attempt to provide us with a nest egg so that when we have a natural disaster or some other kind of disaster, we have something to go to and we don't just all crumble. I would say that our current public health crisis is a similar kind of thing.
So next week is capital budget. Is there a night that discusses fund balance? Or is tonight the night where we discuss that more?
Actually, so I think that'll probably be a recurring theme.
Okay.
It definitely will come up next year because fund balance is part of the funding applied from, then transfer from the general fund to the capital fund
So next
to
week.
address the proposed capital expenses, is where we propose to use the fund balance. So we definitely will talk about it again next week, and we can talk about it again in the future beyond that. This discussion about the porta potties, for instance, is something I think is likely. We'll make a list of issues, as we always do, of things that have come up. So tonight it includes fund balance, it includes the pool.
The pool, the house, yeah, I also
It
want to talk
includes
about
the
that.
porta potties, and other opiate crisis-related expenses. And we'll come back to those, on other evenings as you deem appropriate, or at the very least at the end, once we've been through all of the department presentations and we get into mid-December, and then we move on into the new year, there's always, 3 or 4 meetings where we're just kind of wrapping things up and taking that list of unfinished items and narrowing it down until you get to an approvable budget.
Did I see a hand go up in the community, or was that just maybe it's Kurt's? Did you want to come up and ask a question? I'm sorry if I ignored you for a little while. It took my brain a minute to register that I saw this. I thought I did.
Probably didn't recognize me because I don't have my bow tie on.
That's what it was.
Casual day.
So where in the budget is cybersecurity hidden?
That's a good question.
There are IT-related expenses that include cybersecurity, in addition to a variety of other, software maintenance and other kinds of IT-related expenses. There is not a line item that speaks specifically to
Okay, because what I
cybersecurity.
saw was computer maintenance, computer supplies,
Right.
but nothing that seemed to relate directly to cybersecurity.
We outsource that with remote login access, right?
So- So there's a yes to that, and it's all of our patching and related work around that is done by a company with whom we contract, and there are expenses from those various IT-related line items that pay for that contract. Some of what they're doing is related to, firewalls and other aspects of keeping our systems secure, but we don't have a separate line item for that.
Okay, so it's drawn from all departmental budgets?
Yes.
Okay,
And it's managed primarily by Patrick out of our office. So there's a coordinated way in which the relationship with the vendor is managed, but the costs are paid by each individual department based on the amount of users and equipment that they have.
all right, thank you.
Thanks, Kurt.
And the vendor
Plus,
contract.
it's security, so we have to keep it secret.
Okay. All right.
Oh, you want to?
You want to go to revenues?
Yeah.
That's ready to
Sorry.
go to revenues if the board is.
If
There's a
staff's
hand
ready,
up.
then I'm ready. Are you ready, Tim?
As long as, I thought maybe you were going to throw it out.
Franz? Yeah. If they
For the
relate to
overall-
what we've already spoken about, then you should ask now. And if you feel like it relates to revenues, then let's wait. And I'm sorry that I'm having a hard time hearing. It's this heater behind me. Very
Maybe it's
loud.
this-
It's Peter?
Franz Reichsman from the Finance Committee.
Oh, that's better. Thank you.
I'll wait until the janitor is seated there. Well, it's because I'm
Upgrade.
kind of addressing him with this. As I recall, we were going to devote like $1 million a year to infrastructure projects. That was kind of an ongoing goal. And this year for the capital projects, we see a substantial drop well below that level.
Right.
So that's one part of my question.
Okay.
The other part is that if we bond $5 million at a 5% interest rate for 20 years, looks to me like we'd be paying $400,000 a year on that, principal plus interest.
Right.
So would that count as part of the $1 million? Are those improvements included in what we've been anticipating we need $1 million a year for?
Great. Thank you.
No to the most recent question. That's why we're relating the timing of that to a decrease in debt service, and we'll have a lot more specific information to share around that on other nights. We're really not prepared to talk about it in detail. What we wanted to do was, we see it coming. We wanted to flag it now so that everybody else can see it coming as we deal with this budget. It's way too premature to peg a number and percentage rate and all of that. So we'll work on those things in the future.
Well, the reason I tacked that on was because my question really is about the $1 million.
$1 million. And
Yeah.
so in the $1 million, there's a clarification I need to offer. I hope it'll refresh your recollection, but if it doesn't, then you and I should have more communication around this. I'd be happy to come and talk about it with the Finance Committee. The $1 million was intended to be for capital, not just capital projects. And one of the problems we've had with capital, as we've been getting ourselves sort of back up on top of the horse, you'll recall that 5 years ago, the total cash committed to capital projects and capital equipment was less than $400,000. And we weren't keeping up with either. So as we've been making progress in how we're planning for and budgeting for and executing the capital investments that we make, sometimes in equipment, sometimes in very big, expensive pieces of equipment, and sometimes in projects. The marker we set for ourselves was we needed to work our way up as we could afford it over a period of years to get to where we were spending at least $1 million a year in cash on capital. And we achieved that last year. We actually foreshadow in this proposed budget that based on what we now know, now that we've come up with the 25-year replacement program that will go everything from a 25-year ladder truck to a 20-year fire engine to a 15-year dump truck or graders to 10 or 12-year dump trucks, and then down to smaller pieces that don't last as long. All of that is laid out over a 25-year period. We showed that for the first time a year ago, but didn't fund it. This year, what we're proposing is to actually fund it for the first year of what will now be a recurring 25-year process, always dropping off 1 year and adding 1 more year, so we're always looking 25 years ahead. The value of doing that for equipment has 3 primary reasons why it's the right way to run the railroad. Is instead of these wild fluctuations, so this year is the very last year of a wild fluctuation where we have a significant increase in, we only have so much money we can give to capital. So it's a significant increase in equipment and a significant drop in projects this year. From here on in, by doing a almost level, going up just a few $1,000s a year in the funding of the capital equipment program, we can much more clearly see what our wherewithal is to address our needs on the project side. And what we're revealing in this moment is when we look at that, there isn't enough money on the project side. We're going to need to slowly over time, that same kind of a goal that we set for ourselves almost 5 years ago now, about 4 years ago, to go from $400,000 a year up to $1 million a year towards capital. What we're saying is we think we need to go from $1 million to $1.5 million over a period of time, not in a hurry, but as we can afford to do it over the next several years. And that $1.5 million will be for the combination of what is starting out at about $750, I think. We've got a real number in these documents, $750,000 or thereabouts for the capital equipment, and then just going up very slowly over time, and then the balance going to projects. And what we're saying is we can afford to do a fair amount of paving, have a good, robust paving program. We can afford to do sidewalk work and increase that a bit over time. Those are going to be recurring project expenses. Outside of that, there's a few other things we can afford to do, but something like upgrading the facilities for the next, there's part of what we're talking about doing at Memorial Park is in the rink, replacing equipment that was originally installed when the rink was created in the 1970s. So it's been that long since we made this kind of an investment, and we need to make this kind of an investment again, but we're not going to need to make it for decades. And the same thing is true at Public Works. If you've been to Public Works, you know the condition of the facilities there. We've identified that as a major need, both for safety and for just proper functioning. But now we're getting our arms better around the magnitude of it. And what we're saying is, we don't yet know the total figures. We don't yet know exactly the timing, but we're going to need a bond to pay for those 2 projects.
And the debt service on the bond would be in addition to the $1.5 million that you're looking for?
Yes, because the debt service, the timing that we're trying to hit with that would relate to a year when debt service is decreasing significantly. It won't be decreasing by $400,000.
No, it won't.
But where it's decreasing by well over $100,000, and we can kind of, work that puzzle. And the other thing that well and others may not is because of how municipal borrowing works in Vermont, the biggest year, the most expensive year is the first year. Instead of having level funded over the period of the debt, you pay for level principal payments over the life of the debt, but you pay for the interest that's owed based on how much is outstanding. So you start off at a figure that can be daunting, and that's the right way to do it in terms of the transparency to the public when a decision is being made about affording the debt service. But the good part of that is every year thereafter, and for the larger investments, it's a pretty substantial decline every year thereafter, and that debt service payment goes down. So unlike a car payment that we all might make or a mortgage payment we all might make, there's a different structure here that makes the pill hard to swallow at the beginning, but it gives you the flexibility to manage taking on additional debt as the larger ones fall off the budget.
Thank you.
Thanks, Franz. Any other questions from the community while we're in this pause? I will say we are going to take a break at 8:15, so let me just toss it out there.
Hello, Alex Fisher, District 2. I was wondering who does the layout of the budget?
Like the physical landscaping
Yeah.
layout, font and size and all that.
That's Patrick and me.
I was just wondering if it would be possible to do some work around making it more accessible with visuals and graphs. I know y'all think I like run a justice center in town, but I actually am a finance person and spend a lot of my time doing budget work with folks that are non-finance people, and would love to see just there's like some simple ways and then other more invested ways, but I'm happy to meet with y'all just for fun to talk about some of that if you want.
I'm sorry.
That would be nice.
I've received exactly that feedback from members of the board, and we agree. It's actually something Patrick and I have talked about over the years. Again, we produced the document, and so that's been one of those things we've been intending to do and haven't yet accomplished. We've received private encouragement from our bosses, and now some public encouragement. We'll be looking at ways to provide some visual representation that's more accessible to a broader array of folks across the communities.
If you have examples
She's
that you'd like to
volunteering.
send,
I
that would be great.
I do have example. I mean,
Great.
yeah, I'm also
Yeah.
saying like I've also produced budgets that look this way,
Yeah.
and I'm starting to produce ones that look other ways, and the
Cool.
amount of conversation and engagement is significantly different in terms of people's understanding of key pieces. And I think also with that is the concept of budgets as moral documents, and the idea of where the values of the town being invested. And it's so hard to find things in this, and yet like on the one hand I appreciate all the detail all the time, but also it's hard to kind of figure out some of the broader values-based questions that one would ask.
So
of
let's
the
you and I
town.
meet soon
Great.
about that.
Yeah, that'd be so fun.
Talk about it
Thank
further.
you.
Thanks, Alex. David?
Just and further encouragement for that, I think what Alex said about the values of the community, and when you produce graphs that target those, it makes it really obvious what they are, and it's information that people are looking for. So I definitely want to double down on that recommendation, and also point out that since the town report won't have to have a school budget in it this year, there'll be plenty of room for pictures.
Does that mean no pizza?
No, it doesn't mean that. It never means that.
Okay.
What's pizza got?
The town meeting, sorry.
All right, where are we at now?
Well, we can go into revenues, or we can take that break you were talking about, whatever you prefer.
I think we'll take the break now. This seems like a
All
good
right.
idea. And so let's meet back here by 8:10. Good solid number, right? Okay, thank you, and welcome back to the meeting. We have taken a break, cleared our minds, and anything else that needed to be cleared, and we now resume. Peter, can you let us know what we're resuming into?
We are resuming into revenues, which is
Excellent.
on page 1 of the detailed line item budget. So
We
that's,
haven't made it very far then. Just kidding.
so we've got 4 pages of revenues, I believe. Let me double check. Yes, we do. So what we'd like to do is spend the next little bit going over the 4 pages of revenues with you. There are department heads in the room who have responsibility over some of those lines. And then when you are satisfied with this initial presentation, at least on revenues, we'd like to move on into the Public Works departmental presentation and the Recreation and Parks.
Great, thank you.
So beginning at the top of page 1, the items, I don't think we want to spend time looking at, line item by line item. What I would call out is that the items of change on page 1 include the in lieu of taxes increase of $20,000 I already mentioned. The meals, alcohol, and rooms increase of $20,000 that I already mentioned. The $374,329 for taxes, property taxes. That's a slightly different number than what was in the summary because of the other tax items that are reflected elsewhere.
Okay.
Down to the bottom of that page, $1,000 increase in projected dog license revenue and $100 increase in liquor and tobacco license revenue. Otherwise, this first page is unchanged from the current year.
Why are there going to be more dogs?
More licensed dogs.
Or licensed dogs. There also may be a fee increase. Is there a fee increase? Nope. Just more licensed
More
dogs.
The dog catchers.
Oh, sure, Hillary, that'd be great.
Do it up.
Or come sit at the table.
I can. If there are more questions, I'll sit at the table.
Okay.
For this one, last year was one of the first years, since I've been there anyway, the first year that we had 100% of the previous dogs actually renew. And so we saw a little bit of an increase in the revenue from that. And we're anticipating continuing to make calls and send multiple letters to get that. And so in anticipation of 100% renewal, we upped it a little bit.
Great.
Great.
Thank you. We'll set the
Dog
move on.
it.
I say Worcesterful or something.
Move on before the dog puns keep going.
On page 2, planning permit fees are projected to decrease, not from actual renewals, but we've been a little overly optimistic in recent years. We've had it, you can see, a $30,000 a year followed by a $29,000 a year, and we've been budgeting $50,000 each year. We think it's just time to get more realistic there. We're still actually being on the optimistic side, but we're projecting 40 instead of 50. So that's a $10,000 decrease on the budget. This is where you see the employee insurance contribution show up to $20,000. And then very small increases, $1,200 for reimbursements at the library, and $1,000 for increase in non-resident fees at the library, $2,000 decrease in miscellaneous revenue. All of those related to trying to be more accurate based on the trends rather than anything that's changing in the policies.
Great.
Okay.
What's tower
Yes.
rent?
Are you still going?
Yes, I was going to go on to 3 unless you have a
Please
question.
do. No. I
Okay.
thought you had stopped. For some-
Nope. So fire is the next category. There's no changes. We propose each of the 4 fire sources of revenue to be level with last year, or this current year. Municipal center, a slight decrease. There is less square footage being rented in the municipal center by the state of Vermont, so we've got a slight decrease in rental revenue. Police revenues, a small and calculated change in the rental income based on another year of inflationary increase to the rent that's charged to the reformer, and a significant decrease in upfit reimbursement. So over these first, I believe it's 4 years of the, maybe 3, of the reformer's lease at the police facility, we've been getting reimbursed for the reformer's share of the upfit expenses from the project, the construction project. That ends halfway through FY 21, and so the annualized revenue is decreasing by 5634. It will decrease again in the FY 22 budget by 5634, and then that will be gone. Police outside revenue is down by $10,000. The reason for that is we are doing less and less outside details, just based on staffing and the needs of the community. We refer almost all requests for outside details from the police department to Windham County Sheriff. Any questions?
Yes. You ready for questions? Just on that page?
Sure.
I forgot which page we're on.
We're on 3.
Okay. False alarms in the police.
Yes.
Aren't there false alarms for fire, and do we have a revenue line item for that?
We don't currently have a revenue line item for that. I believe that it's shown in police because where that is tracked is in dispatch, which is an operation that serves both departments and Rescue Inc., but is located within the police department. We are looking at the possibility of doing a fee system related to the more sophisticated capabilities of the alarm systems in buildings, and we're not quite ready to unveil that yet. But
Our billing invoice or our building ordinance, I mean.
Yes.
The revenue on that is shown in the outside revenue,
Yeah,
Okay.
Okay. Yeah,
mixed into that.
got it.
Thank
Thank you.
but I was just curious about, like, you go on false alarms calls, it happens, right?
Yep, and
Does that not get charged if it happens over and over again?
Over 3 years.
Okay, so that shows up somewhere else.
I think.
In the police.
In outside revenue, well, what the chief is saying is that within fire, it actually shows up in outside revenue.
Oh, okay,
That
I'm sorry.
$10,000 line item.
Great.
Yep. And also, just to note for the record, the $56,250 rental housing fees, that's from the creation of the rental housing registration and inspection program. We promised in bringing that forward and in the manner in which you approved it last year, that the fee structure would be level for 4 years, so that everybody pays the same fee on the first cycle through, and then we'll reassess whether or not that's sufficient for the next 4 years. And so it is level funded this year at $56,250. And on the final page of revenues, the state current use payment is again just to reflect the fact that we've been collecting a little better than $170,000. We've only been budgeting $160,000, so we're increasing that to $170,000, which is a $10,000 increase. There's a variety of small increases and decreases that net out to an increase of $3,000 in recreation and park fees. If you have any questions about the details of those 8 or 10 different items, Carol's here and can explain that. And the utility fund transfers I mentioned in the overview, they're increasing slightly based on using the same formula for services provided by the general fund, but applying that to a year's worth of inflation, and it comes out to $10,000 worth increase in the reimbursement to the general fund. Okay.
Quick question.
Please.
What's that reimbursement at the top of FY 2019?
That's a good question. Carol, what is the $14,468 reimbursement in the Recreation and Parks revenue from 2019, last fiscal year?
I believe that had to do with the promise grant.
Okay. Yes, for the playground equipment at Crowlot?
Right.
Got it. That's what that is. Thank you.
The swing sets look wonderful up there. Well, I use them a lot. They don't just look wonderful, they feel wonderful.
Good.
Yeah. I like
Any other questions on revenues?
Come on, everybody. Yes, I've got a couple more questions.
You're much more of an expenditure
What about
questioner.
what about the parking garage revenue?
That's in the parking fund, which we'll be looking at in the spring.
Okay, and a related question to that. Weren't we trying to line up these funds a little bit? What was the update on that?
So I think what you're thinking of is we've got some significant investments that need to be made in the utility fund, plus we want to update the ordinance for the utility fees.
Sure.
And we had been planning to have a special meeting in October around that set of issues,
Right.
which would have had the benefit of providing you and the public with some insights into what's happening over in that utility fund while you're making decisions about this budget. It's possible we still might be having that discussion before you're done with this budget, but it wouldn't be until very nearly the end, and it might be not possible at all to have that overlap. Based on what we reported to you a few weeks back about the work that's still going on with scoping the project and being in a position to bring reliable information to you.
Okay.
So
I'm not sure that's what I thought I was
Oh.
remembering on a discussion about lining up
When you say lining up,
water sewer budget with our normal budget process, or we weren't talking about that at one point.
Oh,
No.
instead of doing it on a separate night or separate time, exact entirely?
Yeah, I think so too.
Well,
Was
one's
that
in the
solid
spring,
waste?
right?
Yeah, it's once in the spring, right?
And the reason for that is, frankly, it would be better to not be doing this process when you're 3 months into a fiscal year. When you think about it, what we're looking at are numbers that are projecting the actual expenses and revenues of the town beginning 9 months from now and ending 21 months from now. we have to do that in order to give ourselves enough time to get done with it in January and have it ready for town meeting in March. But that's really months earlier than we ought to be doing it. So because the utility fund and the parking fund don't have to go to town meeting, we have followed a better practice on that of being closer to the end of the fiscal year before we bring forward the proposed budget. We have a much better handle on the details that we present at that time.
Yeah. Come on, someone else has to have a question.
Nope.
I have one more, it's more of a comment.
Take it away.
So meals, alcohol, and rooms, and sales tax, they're similar but different.
You're looking at page 1?
Yep, page 1.
Page 1, thank you. We don't really have a lot of evidence about trends yet in meals, alcohol, and rooms, right? Because we have a line agenda item coming up that relates somewhat to that subject. I'm just trying to get a sense on if we have a finger on how much we should be rising. You know, we have a rise of $20,000. Is that based on any kind of metrics that are
Absolutely.
real world?
Yep. So it's based on the actual collections from 2019. You can see that the actual collected in 2018 was 421 and change. So we budgeted 420. And then the next year, the actual collected was 437 and change, so we budgeted 440.
Okay. It's, and similarly, we're locking in the sales tax even though, where are we at with that kind of, do we have any measurements?
We have such partial data at this point that it would be a distortion at best to offer it to you. So, I mean, it shows in the monthly report, and we can talk about it at next week's meeting when you see the monthly financial report if you want to review it. But what we can certify to you at this time is it isn't yet fully implemented in a way that we're getting reliable data that we could say, well, what we're getting is approximately X per month. We just don't know.
Right, and we really don't have any hints even.
No, and we have a concern, but we can't measure that concern, that this first year might actually lag the 630 based on the fact that there's kind of some, shakedown that occurs to make sure that everybody is operating in accordance with the requirements and submitting what they have to submit to the state, and then the state is sending it back to us properly. And until that hits an equilibrium, right now what we've seen is we know it's not everything that is owed to us, and we're not sure exactly where the state is in whether they're just catching up procedurally or whether there's going to be a period of months at the beginning of this thing where we don't get the full monthly allotment, and then it kind of catches up to that with compliance somewhere in the first fiscal year. To the degree that it's the latter, we're going to under-collect the 630. The reason we think it's still responsible to put in 630 for the next year is that the calculation on which the 630 was based is still a reliable calculation. It's just based on a whole year's worth of data, and we're not sure we're going to get a whole year's worth of receipts in the first year.
By my recollection, it was a little bit conservative.
It was a little bit conservative, that's correct.
So that's a safer way to list it.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Has there been any conversation with other towns that have also enacted one of these local option sales taxes and found out about their experience in the early year?
We haven't reached out since we've been implementing. We did talk to some of those towns in the consideration of whether or not to do this, and one of the recurring themes, it's not very satisfying, it's kind of the same old, but Dillon's rural state, heavy state control. The fact that we only get 2/3 of the revenue and 1/3 of it is kept by the state, which is way more than what it costs them to administer this, is unfortunate. And it also, one related aspect to that is they don't share very openly their processes. They send you the check that they've determined you're entitled to.
They do list, they do break out meals, alcohol, and rooms eventually, but it takes a couple years,
Right.
it seems.
We've been in touch with the folks at the state that are responsible for this part of the program and responsible for determining what we're entitled to. And received satisfactory answers. I've not actually spoken directly with them. I think Patrick has, but I'm not sure. I know John O'Connor has, and Patrick's nodding. So, both Patrick and John have had some communication with the folks there. We don't think there's anything going on here except it's just slow to roll out.
Right.
It's going to be a little while before it's fully implemented and we can count on the revenue flow sufficiently to project future revenue flow.
It would also be super handy from our perspective, from all municipalities, to actually know what percentage, for instance, is Airbnb versus traditional hotels, rooms, etc. So, but we just, as far as I know, there's no way to get that data.
As far as I know, there's no way to get that data.
Okay. It's frustrating.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yes, that would be interesting data to look at.
Thank you.
Are
all
there
for
any
that.
other questions on revenues before we move into departments?
Are there questions from the community on revenues before we move on to department presentations? Okay. All right,
All right.
Peter, move us on. Please.
Steve? Okay. And the Public Works budget begins on
Page 14.
Thank you.
14, thank you.
So I could just go over some of the line items, and then if the board has questions, ask away.
Sounds good.
Peter explained the salaries, so I don't need to go over those, or the retirement pay. We get to the overtime, there's been an increase there to better reflect the actual cost. If you look back across the overtime numbers, the actual, 119,000, 126, 102, and we've been budgeting 92. We're just raising that up to reflect the actual, and it's really the,
Good.
guess we'll call it climate control, right? So moving on,
That's you.
one of the items that Peter also touched on was the seasonal help, and that seasonal help's important to us. For many years that we did have seasonal help. They assist the full-time employees with the stormwater catch basins. We can actually go out, bring them as laborers to install new sidewalks. So there's quite a bit of savings there, and it's quite helpful. And it's a lot of the tasks that we just, quite frankly, don't get done. So we think it's a good investment. We talked about the pay. The pay is basically anywhere between $11 and $12 an hour. Most of the, it's college or high school. It's 40 hours a week, which is important to those people getting seasonal employment, where a lot of the jobs they get are only part-time. So we've had great success in recruiting people for those jobs at the cost of the seasonal help.
So
Which is-
the season is summer?
The season can be, like with college students, they get out in the spring, and then usually through August, somewhere in that area. We figure it's 10 to 12 weeks on average, and usually we get probably 8 to 10 weeks.
And this is a new
Yes.
budget item?
Well, it's new old, it's
Making a
back.
return appearance.
It's back, okay? We had it for many, many years, and it's was taken away as a budget cut. And so now we're bringing it back to, we miss it dearly, and we feel the impact, and the public also sees the impact. It's all the things we just can't get to. And a lot of the sidewalk work, if we contract it out, it's limited on the amount of, actual feet of sidewalk that you'll put in. And economically, if we use the seasonal help with full-time work, we can pour sidewalks and get a great deal of sidewalk in per year. So we think it's really a good benefit.
Can I ask a further question about that? In the past, when you had seasonal help, did any of those seasonal workers then go on to become full-time
Yes,
public works?
yeah. Some of them became firefighters, utilities. We've recruited people. We've had some people that just stayed with us all the way through college and then went on and did different careers, but we've actually had people that went to college, graduated from college, and then came back.
Great.
So but again, we haven't had the program in a while, so
Yep.
Is
hopefully
this
this
men
will.
and women?
Men and women, yes, yep. So it's been good. So moving down, I'll just kind of highlight things. Professional services, that's when we will hire an engineer, or we may hire a company to come in that specializes with certain equipment or advice. This is primarily, though, for engineering, so we've increased that by $2,000. Our equipment rental, that supplements the equipment that we have. We rent some equipment because it's instead of buying another backhoe, for instance, we can rent one, and we have good arrangements that we pay for the actual hours used. So it saves the town money versus going out and making that investment to buy more equipment. And pretty much we're level funded here all the way down through with the telephone, the copier, postage, office supplies, clothing, safety equipment. Those are all pretty much level funded. If we go to page 15, the top item is Public Works bridges. We have approximately 30 bridges, and then we have thousands of culverts that are large culverts that need to be repaired. That comes out of this line item. We've increased it slightly by $2,000. There's a $12,000 line item for bridges. And that's any kind of repair or new membrane put on a bridge or anything of that nature. The stormwater, if you look at the first three items, pipes, grate, risers, that's an existing account that we've had for years to try to keep the existing drainage system, stormwater in Brattleboro, where our stormwater is separate from our wastewater. So this is all the rainwater and the catch basins. But this money is also used for any of the culverts out in the country. We have 38 miles of gravel road. It's also assist us out there too. So that's where we've, with the new stormwater regulations, we added a line item for engineering, stormwater upgrades, and permits and compliance. The engineering would be for design of systems. Also, we hired college interns to go around and evaluate our whole system just this last summer. So we may do more work with that with interns. And again, with basic design, everything has to be designed and approved and built to a certain standard. The stormwater upgrades, that is actually the physical work, the work that goes into stabilizing these ditches and culverts and pipes. Permits and compliance, we have several stormwater retention systems that are permitted, and there's fees associated with those that we have to pay to the state to regulate those particular stormwater systems.
Can I ask a question on that?
Sure.
It's actually mostly a clarifier for anybody who's watching that hasn't been following along. So that extra, basically $60,000 that's we're seeing as an increase in that budget
Yes.
is state mandated.
Yep.
And the state did not offer us offsetting funding for that. It's coming out of our pockets.
There are some grants available. In fact, Dan has put in for some of the grants, so that
Nice.
we just recently we had a grant this summer, correct?
Right, we did a section of Bonneville Road from Beek to the town line.
Awesome.
That was grant
And
funded.
that value
It's
was
about $25,000 to $30,000.
Okay.
so there is.
We've got another one coming
Yeah.
on next week's budget.
Yeah.
Next week's agenda, we'll have another grant that's related to this program, but the state is not funding adequately
Right.
to
Right.
pay for all of the additional requirements.
Thank you. I
And
just wanted to
Peter-
clarify that for people who might not have been following along throughout the year.
And isn't that what you were talking about earlier, that we're going to recoup with the next year?
Exactly. So just a quick hit on that. So the increased cost this year is $60,000, which is about half a penny, a little bit more than half a penny impact to meet that state requirement. But the overall cost of this program without labor, just for the 6 listed line items, is $84,500. Our intent in working towards the creation of a stormwater utility will be to very carefully calculate, not just these, but other non-salary expenses, and then the salary and benefits related to operating. Basically, how to segregate this operation in the same way as the operation of water and sewer utility or the parking fund. When that's done, the amount of relief it'll provide to the property taxpayers is going to be significantly higher than $84,500, but we can't tell you right now exactly what it's going to be.
Thanks for those clarifiers.
So then we move on into Public Works equipment, and that is our maintenance department for the repair of parts for the fleet that we have. We've increased that by 2%, $2,000. It's $100,000. That's for all the dump trucks, graders, loaders, specialty equipment. Tires and accessories, $15,000. It's an increase of 25%, $3,000 increase. And small tools are tools that are purchased by the employees for work on their jobs. And then the gas, Public Works gas and oil, you can see that they're pretty much averaged out. There's no increases. For gasoline, there's 8,000, diesel's 80, and lube and oil is 7,500. And what we call summer roads, chloride, we use a magnesium chloride, that's for dust control out on the gravel roads. There's a twofold benefit to that. Not only does it keep the dust down, but it also keeps the fines from washing off the gravel roads. So that's money well spent. It's usually done in the springtime after we do our final grading. We'll chloride it, and then sporadically, depending on the amount of money we have, throughout the summer for dust control. And then one more time in the fall to stabilize the roads before we go into the winter. Hot mix account, that $32,000 is for patching or around town. It's strictly for repair work, berms and things of that nature. Coal patch, there's $1,000 in there. We reluctantly use coal patch. I guess we kind of look at it as a car undercoating, and it doesn't last very long. We do have what we call a hot mix box, which is heated by electricity and propane that we can take and recycle hot mix, and that's what we prefer to use. But when we get into springtime, sometimes the volume needed, we just can't keep up with the equipment we have. So that's why there's a line item for coal patch. Sometimes it's just necessary, or in the middle of the night when you need to make a repair on a road. In the middle of the winter, you need to put something there. The gravel account, we've gone up slightly, $2,000 to $34,000. That is used on the back roads. We try to apply as gravel in different spots that have problems, and of course, every year you lose a certain amount of your gravel roads to washing and to wind. Guardrails, that's for ongoing. It's a $12,000 line item. We've increased it by $2,000. That's to fix various sections of guardrail throughout town. And the sidewalk repair, that is a line item to repair sidewalks in town, sectional, just sections of sidewalk. Retaining walls, this is just a small fund to some of the smaller retaining walls that we have. If we have a larger wall, this money can also be used for planning. So like say we had a wall that was in a situation where we felt it might need to be replaced another year, we want a good estimate. Sometimes we'll use this money to get a design on something, so then if we get a grant or we get funding, or if the wall fails, then we know how much that's going to cost. And generally this is for the real small retaining walls, not the ones that we discussed earlier, the larger ones with the 6 figures. Street markings, that's level funded at $12,500. That's to put street signs up and all the other various signs throughout town. Broom materials for the sweeper, it's $3,000. That's just for the street sweeper itself. Traffic safety, that's a line item that was added a few years ago. That's where the speed tables came from that we put on Guilford Street. And the RRFBs that are in town, that's what that line item's used for. And usually we go to traffic safety, we come up with a directive or an idea, and then Public Works utilizes those funds to support the decisions that are made at traffic safety.
You gave an acronym for something just then after the speed tables you said.
Rectangular rapid flashing beacons. Those are the pedestrian push buttons by the Creamery Bridge.
Okay.
So those cost about $10,000, okay. 8 to 10,000 if you're going to purchase one. And the traffic safety's already voted to install one over by the Common near North Street, in that area between there and Bradley.
Oh, that's nice.
So it's just kind of,
idea.
it's just kind of having a catch-up year. So we have them as you come into town on Route 30, when you come in from Route 9 from Bennington. So we have one up by the hospital. So this will give us one on the entrance coming in from Route 5 into the village, we like to call it, or the slower speeds. Tree removal, well, line striping, that's for line striping throughout town. Our crews do the actual line striping, and there's no increase there. That 27,000 is used to do spring line striping, and then in the fall, we freshen up the primary crosswalks on the main roadways. So it's really twice a year, but only the crosswalks and, again, on the main arteries coming into town in the fall. Tree removal is for trees that, during storms. We've increased that by 2,000 to 12,000. And tree care, that may be replacing a tree that we've removed. Many times we like to, if we remove a tree, replace a tree, and that's what that money's used for. The salt is 126,000. We have a 5% increase. That's generally what the salt goes up each year. Sand is 32,000. We've had an increase of $3,000 or 10%. Chains and blades, those are the blades that are used on the plow themselves. And then we use chains on the tires to prevent going off the road. On the back roads, when you get an ice storm, all the trucks are chained up. That's what pays for that. The equipment maintenance, this is more like to track more of the winter maintenance of those vehicles for those different parts, specialty parts for snow plowing. And again, the last two items, the chains and blades, the equipment maintenance, they're level funded. The Public Works yard expense, that's for Public Works itself. The fuel expense is level funded at the 12. There's a slight, well, actually 11% increase, minus 11 of 9,000 for electrical. That's gone down. The utilities is for the water and sewer. The actual utilities division, the highway pays the utilities to the utilities division for the use of the facilities. Building repairs, there's 15,000. That's just to keep the building in order. Maintenance supplies for basic maintenance supplies for the place and refuge charges. And the last item in Public Works is the traffic lights. And that is usually, you just don't know with the traffic lights. You can see in the past, actual was 16,000, we're budgeting 8, but then you can see in the past it's been 8,000. So with traffic lights, generally when they're running, they run fine, and then every once in a while you run into a controller or a problem where you got to bring a service person out, and so we kind of average it at the 8,000. And that's the Public Works budget.
Excellent. Thank you very much. David?
Steve, on just a clarification on 15 at the bottom, the sidewalk repairs, there's 27.5.
Yes.
I can't remember where, I'm pretty sure it was today, but I know in the past, I think we increased that to 75,000.
That would be when we go over next week for the capital.
Gotcha.
So this is kind of more that spot
Just
repair where
right, gotcha.
somebody
Thank
calls and there's a section that needs to be replaced. So that can actually, or even a small, 40-foot section. That's what we'll take out of here. Then the capital would be those larger projects where we're trying to get, a whole side of a street done. Yep.
Thank you.
Actually, you make a good point, David, because this jumped up 2019 to 2020, right?
Yes.
It like doubled
Yep.
just for the spot repair stuff.
Yes.
And that was intentional as well, right?
This goes along with the seasonal help.
Right.
So we can
A lot
actually
of people
get,
talk to me about sidewalks.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's never a shortage of sidewalks that need to be repaired.
No.
You send the kids out with wheelbarrows and bags of cement and mix it up on the spot?
Actually, they'll actually go out and they're really efficient. Once they learn how to use the forms, they'll have a full-time staff member, and they're the laborers, and they'll actually help. And once they're trained to do that particular task, it's quite efficient for us, because then we can take higher skilled workers to be doing the other work. So, works really good.
I'm glad about like the seasonal staff, and I wonder like what they do in 1 hour. You know, so an hour's work for one of those college students, perhaps that is laboring. What would that involve in an hour's work?
Oh, that could, just for instance, forming a sidewalk. There's pre-forms that have to go up, and they would actually lay those out, spread gravel, rake it, compact it with a compactor. You know, it's just one example. With a catch basin cleaner, they would be working with a full-time staff member. It's basically like a huge vacuum cleaner where they pull up, they got to pop the grate off a storm drain, and then they have to take the tube and put it down in, they activate the machine, they clean all that material out. So they could do multiple drains on a street in an hour. So it's pretty highly efficient, but you need 2 people, so that extra person, that extra set of hands, where you have you know, a full-time staff member that operates the equipment and the machinery. That's the key of kind of the blend between the two.
Okay.
And then when they come back, some of these employees come back each year, then they become more skilled, and they can get even more done.
That's great.
Other questions from the board?
I don't.
Pretty straightforward to me. Pretty straightforward budget. Are there questions?
Oh,
from-
actually, I did have a question.
Jesus.
Sorry. And it's actually like, I don't know, this might feel kind of awkward, but I'm going to just say it anyway. Because when I was doing my homework, I was looking at all of the budget, and I was kind of looking at salaries and stuff, because that's part of the budget. And I looked at the department head salary for Public Works, and I was like, why is the department head salary for Public Works so much lower than everyone else's?
That has been a question before,
I
hasn't
asked
it,
that
Tim?
question last year.
So I
bet you Steve asked
I think we asked it.
I have the answer.
The answer is that it's not only funded through the general fund.
Correct. Jeez.
Half of Steve's salary is paid here, and the other half through the utility fund, because he's responsible for both operations.
And the reason why I was asking it was because I was like, oh, why is Steve being
That
treated
doesn't seem
so
fair.
Yeah, we've all been appalled at one point or another on our
I know, I felt
board
the sympathy.
until we learned.
So, there you go.
Okay. Questions from the community for Public Works budget?
Nope.
No? No? Okay. Thank you
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you so much,
Okay.
Dan.
To point out that Steve has been on the town clock now for 12, 13, 14, 15 hours.
And he deserves every one of those
Thank you.
dollars, not the hours,
Well,
but
maybe
the
Dan.
No, wait,
too.
starting at
What about Dan? Maybe.
5 to 5. No.
Did you get to come in late today,
No,
Dan?
Dan was too.
No?
No.
Both of them.
Okay, at this time, we're gonna move into, oh, excuse me. I thought I felt a sneeze coming on. To the Recreation and Parks budget, and we have Carol Lott coming up to the table.
On page
And
17.
we are on page thank you, page 17.
Okay, good evening.
Hello, Karen.
I'm going to take a little bit different approach than what Steve did, and I'm going to give you a nutshell of what Rec and Parks does, and so that you can have an idea of how this money is spent. So if you just bear with me for that nutshell presentation, and then I'll field any questions that you might have. The Recreation and Parks Department is asking for $800,185, which is just under a 1% increase, which comes up to a total of $5,571. What we spend that money on is staffing. It was a big chunk. There's 8 full-time employees. There's the director, assistant director, program coordinator, administrative assistant, park supervisor, and 3 park maintenance staff. We have 40 seasonal employees, and that seems to be a theme here this evening. So 40 seasonal employees in both the summer and the winter. Summer is the bulk of our seasonal employees. And those are, again, high school and college kids. They work at the swimming pool. They might be lifeguards. They might be water safety instructors. They could be a cashier or checkers, the one that are taking the bags as people are coming in. Then we have seasonal park maintenance that are hired, again, like the college kids that are come on board in mid-May. We have day camp staff in the skating rink. We have skate guards, We have cashiers. At the rec center, we have evening supervisors. And as I said before, we have summer day camp and program staff. The department relies heavily on volunteers. We wouldn't be able to operate if we didn't have the volunteers in our community. People are giving back to the community. And the bulk of that is through youth sports. So whether it's a basketball season or soccer season, or in the spring when we do lacrosse, small fry baseball, softball, we rely on parents helping us out. That also includes down in the senior center. That really helps make us, helps us tick on the volunteers giving back down in the senior center. Then we use a lot of volunteers at our special events. Most recently, ski skate sale, our carnival activities, 4th of July activities. In addition to that, we have a lot of program instructors. So they're not employees of the town of Brattleboro. What they are is contracted service providers. So somebody that is out there teaching Zumba, somebody that is out there teaching Tai Chi or gymnastics. They're not employees of Brattleboro, they're contracted service providers. They have the skills that they can provide, and we're not hiring them on as employees. As far as programs that we offer, we have 9 youth sports, over 20 after-school and summer programs for youth, over 15 adult leagues and programs, over 15 special events, and over 30 activities, programs, and special events for senior citizens. In addition, we coordinate use of our facilities with 13 different community organizations. We take reservations at 16 different facilities. So if you say, "What's the facilities? Are you renting?" Just up the road to Brattleboro Common. You might rent a room at the rec center. You might be renting the Kiwanis shelter at Living Memorial Park. That just to give you a highlight of some of the areas that we do rent out. In addition, we maintain over 130 acres of parkland. That includes, playgrounds, buildings, and utilities in each of these green grass areas. 20 mini parks. So when I talk about mini parks, I'm talking about a Kroll lot. I'm talking about Elliott Street Playground, South Main Street, West Brattleboro Common, all those different areas. 5 traffic islands, 5 cemeteries, all the facilities within Living Memorial Park that include what includes the 300,000-gallon swimming pool and a skating facility. So we're also responsible for the maintenance of the inside and the outside of Gibson Aiken Center. So that was what my money is spent on. If I break it down into the different categories, we talked about staffing. I had very little changes in my expense budgets, but most of that is in the area of salaries, fuel, electric, utilities, and the big one is minimum wage. Because with hiring 40 people, minimum wage is a big thing that I'm working with on a yearly basis. If you would like, I will go down line item if you wish, or I'd be happy to field questions, because there's a lot of repetitive things. Electric is electric, utilities is utilities, and I don't want to bore you with that repetitive. I wanted to give you the nutshell approach.
Thank you, Carol.
Thank you.
Are there questions right off from members of the board?
Got a quick clarifying question. So you were talking about the kind of contracted program staff, like the Zumba instructor. I don't know where I find that in the line.
That's more what you'll find in the revenues, where we're paying out instructors. The program fees is actually an item that is not in this budget.
I'm talking about wait. Okay, no, go ahead.
So the way that works is, Carol can tell us the exact percentages, but
80-20.
80-20. So you sign up for Zumba, and you're going to pay $100 for a session of Zumba, and the instructor is going to receive $80 of the $100 that you pay. We're going to receive $20. The relationship that the town has with the Zumba program is going to be reflected in $20 worth of revenue without any expense.
I see. Got it.
You'll love Zumba.
Yeah, I think I would.
We have it on Mondays and Thursdays.
Mine,
Yeah,
it's my
busy.
niece.
I'm afraid of it. It's really nice.
While I have the mic, maybe I'll just ask my other question. So
Yes,
it's about,
please
it's
do.
about wages, for the theme. So the seasonal employees will make minimum wage.
That's a true and untrue statement.
Yeah,
That's
okay, so
where
what
they
they-
start at minimum wage.
Okay.
Many of like the cashiers, skate guards in the winter, that they're all high school students and they're making that. Where we really have a little staggered increase is when you start getting into the summertime where you have you have to have another supervisor on scene, where you have a pool manager or you have a day camp assistant to the program person. They're being paid a little more than the minimum wage. But most of those entry level seasonals, and seasonals I mean anybody, they'll start anywhere from mid-May and work until mid-August. We love to get them in the door in mid-May, especially if they're working park maintenance because the grass is growing at that time. Yeah, there's a lot to be done at that time of the day, time of the season.
Tim?
No, I think I'm pretty happy.
I'm gonna.
Thank you for a very complete picture.
Yeah. I'm gonna withhold any questions I have till capital.
Great.
Yep.
Let me ask a question about volunteers then, so you use a lot of volunteers in order to do all the stuff that Ratification does. Is that a satisfactory situation in your view?
I think it would be unrealistic for us to think that we would be paying, so for example, let's just use soccer for example. We have 18 teams, you have to pay 18 coaches. I'm not going to sit here and tell you it's not easy to get volunteers sometimes.
Yeah.
It is a challenge, and it's not just here in Brattleboro. It's across the country, people's time it's not there like it used to be. People got double jobs and stuff, but we need to rely on it, is the parents giving back and spending time with their kids and providing that opportunity.
Do you ever partner with like time trade or anything like that to try and find people to come and work on the stuff?
On different projects, not so much for youth sports.
Yeah, right.
You haven't used.
I know who's on time trade. I'm like,
Yeah. With youth sports, it's especially when you get in the third and fourth and fifth and sixth grade level, you gotta have a little bit of knowledge for what you're providing them.
Yeah.
So that eventually you can come home with your opening statement tonight with that state titles, so that if somebody can share that
That's right.
knowledge.
Yeah.
And to give kudos to the high school football team, those kids are giving back too. We have a very strong flag football program that runs on Sundays, and the kids that are running that program is Chad Pacheco out there on Sunday with his guys from the football team, teaching the young kids how to play football. So they're giving back. So it's really nice to see that.
Early recruiting.
Excuse me?
Early recruiting.
Well, you can call it what you need.
But it's good, right? I mean, sort of like what I was trying to get at with the seasonal employees for, DPW as well, like that there should be like a continued relationship, almost like an apprenticeship that then leads to something, right? And that there are employment opportunities in our town that are like worth holding on to and, building on, I should hope.
When many people say, what do you offer for the teenagers? And I say, employment. When we're hiring 40 people, that's a lot in the summertime. 40 teenagers being employed by the town of Brattleboro to provide the services that we provide.
It's pretty awesome.
It is pretty awesome.
Yeah.
Got to give it up for your revenue too, because you have pretty strong revenue.
That's right.
Are there members of that community that have any questions for Carol? Okay, we'll see you again very soon.
All right, thank you.
Thank you, Carol.
Thanks.
Okay.
As we get ready to move on, I'd just like to double check the 4 things that I've got written down as things you'd like us to come back to address in future meetings are the Living Memorial Park swimming pool, the fund balance guideline, the funding of the porta potties, and what I wrote down is versus solutions. I'm not sure that I fully get it, but you and I can talk some more about it.
Public health.
Yeah, sort of that longer term perspective of what are we doing to work towards not having to do stopgap measures is what I understood you to be talking about.
Yes.
So we'll have some further exploration of that. And then better visuals to support the data that's in the document.
Yes. That sound right, David?
Complete?
Pool versus pool house, is that right?
Oh, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter,
Same
okay,
thing,
yeah,
yeah.
okay. Just want to make sure we got
Got
that.
it.
Yes.
Awesome, okay.
Just have a procedural question, I'm not sure if it's procedural, but snuggled between Public Works and Recreation and Parks
Yes.
is regional
Regional.
taxes.
Yeah.
What
Yes.
night are we discussing that?
That's at the last of the,
That's
put
everything
mine
else
away.
night?
that's December 10th, when we're discussing
Okay, good.
Yeah.
the potpourri of all the little departments plus
Yeah.
other topics.
I could just
Snuggled
see
and
like
potpourri.
losing that because it's.
Yeah,
like-
we won't lose that. We'll,
It's nestled,
yeah.
a thin piece of meat
Pet
between those
peeves.
two pieces of bread.
Stop.
But it's a really unsatisfying meal.
Okay,
Nice.
I'm gonna take this,
Very
When
lean.
you see,
Very
I'm
lean.
gonna try to take control of this conversation.
whatever for not much.
Move us along to item C, which is resolutions for a new bank account. Now, this sounds like something that can be fast.
This is gonna be really fast. So
Great.
it's all laid out in the written materials, and just for the benefit of the public, what I'll say is there is a resolution document that has to be approved by the select board for us to be able to open up a new account. We need to open up a new account because we're changing providers of our HRA benefit as part of our health insurance program. So we're asking you to please approve the resolution in the form that it's presented to you.
Excellent.
Perfect sense, glad to do, I'll make the motion, even, no problem whatsoever. But I'm wondering at the same time,
Yep.
is this the point where we would like to start, ask the staff to look into the sustainability practices and the investment practices, particularly around fossil fuels of our banks, that the banks that we do business with? Do we want to
It's
start?
that moment if you wish. I think actually that's a discussion that ought to be had
Out
as a
of the budget.
discussion
Yep.
of which institutions we have relationships with.
Yep.
At this moment in time, I think continuing
Yep.
to, opening this account at the place where we already do banking is the right thing to do.
Oh, yeah, no question
Yeah.
about that. I just
Yeah.
wanted to, just
Great.
put that on the radar at some point.
Sure.
Have a look at those.
Further questions from the board?
When the school district rolled out their HRA, it was really problematic. Do we get any feedback, this is a couple of years ago, do we get any feedback from our staff about whether the HRA works okay for them?
It works great. It has not been problematic for us. We've had it in place, I think, 4 years now, and it's been very successful. We actually get lots of positive feedback from the employees about the health plan in general, this part of it and the basic coverage from Blue Cross. The one nuance to that can be a little trickier for people is there's a place in the, along that continuum from $0 to the deductible amount, which for families is at $8,000, right? But a significant portion of that is picked up by the town through the HRA. There is a place along the way where first dollar coverage of prescriptions is provided, but you're not yet in the, so you haven't hit the deductible, and it can get real tricky for people if they pay for it themselves and then try to get reimbursed.
Yeah.
And so there's actually a separate card, like a little credit card that's an HRA card that people can use if they're in that space in between the out-of-pocket expense for the family and the deductible amount that's then going to kick them into Blue Cross, where the prescription can be purchased with the HRA card. We haven't, that part's more complicated for employees, but we haven't heard a lot of negative feedback about it.
Good.
Peter, does Richard's group manage all of this for us?
Yeah,
We don't have staff in-house handling the,
There's a combination, actually, in terms of the administration of it. There are staff in-house that are handling the oversight. The details are actually the contractors. So there's the administrative oversight by our department. There's the technical oversight by Richard. And then there's the actual service delivery by the
Right.
variety of contractors that are involved.
Right.
We aren't paying individual claims, so we're not paying attention to individual family
Right.
circumstances. That's getting paid by the providers.
Thank you.
I got a form here, burning a hole in mine.
She's excited to get us to sign it.
Yeah.
So
Oh, sorry. You want a motion?
Yes, I do. I thought Dave was going to do that.
Yeah, he was
Well, I
asking
was.
me, and I was passing it on to you.
Thank you. I move that we adopt the community bank authorization resolutions as presented.
Excellent. David has made that motion. All those in favor? Aye. Motion carries unanimously. Okay. Here we are. We are finally at the Brattleboro Community Marketing Initiative, where the Downtown Brattleboro Alliance and the Brattleboro Area Chamber of Commerce are invited to come to our fancy table.
Not that fancy.
If it's fancy, if I say it's fancy.
It's still got that big pimp in it. It's upcycled.
It's upcycled.
It's thrifty.
Frugal. Shabby chic.
Thank you so much for hanging out with us until whatever time it is now. And I'll let you just kick it off and then we'll have our questions.
Okay. So this is the second time that we're coming to you, but I thought it would be helpful to go over the process again. And I'll start with round one. So after the town meeting discussion, we, the Chamber and DBA put together an RFP for a marketing firm to answer to figure out what it is that we can do for a community marketing initiative. And that RFP was put together as well by a project team that we assembled. And the first round project team was assembled. We then brought in 9 different proposals that answered the RFP. And we then put out a Google form survey to even more community members. And then we picked a final 3, had interviews, and didn't choose any of those proposals. We then tweaked it just slightly, the RFP, assembled another project team. So this is round 2 with 10 different people on the project team. We then put out the final 3 to another group of 7 people, community stakeholders, so the Google form again, and got feedback from them. We had phone and in-person interviews, and then the project team chose a final recommendation to the 2 boards. That recommendation was communicated to the 2 boards. The boards came back together with questions that they wanted answered. So we then went back to the final candidate. They answered those questions, and the 2 boards voted in favor of offering the position to, or offering the contract to Penniless Project, which is the proposal that was given to you all as well. And so that is how we got to where we are today. And then Kate is going to tell you a little bit about the proposal and the marketing firm.
I'm hoping you still all have your nice color version that we gave to you. Penniless Projects is out of South Newfane. And they have a team, which you can find on page 1 and 2, of Damian Licks, Maya Segura, and Lynn Barrett. And they're the ones that are going to be the primary people that work on this project with us. As you can see, the main thrust of the project is Love Brattleboro. And they have gone through, and this is the actual proposal that they gave to us. And they've gone through and did various sort of plays on Love Brattleboro with whether it's the craft beer, recreation, parades and festivals, events, as their sort of overall theme of showing us what they could do with Love Brattleboro. And then they did what they're calling a mini campaign, which is to the LGBTQ community, and made a recommendation to us based on some of their research and their knowledge that that might be a constituency that we perhaps can reach out to. Part of what they are recommending is we'll have different graphics so we can tailor it to whatever we want to do, whether it's the craft beer, whether it's recreation, where it's our fields or our festivals and parades. They are proposing to do digital, print. They're proposing really looking at the drive time, the drivable community within New England, whether in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Canada, perhaps even northern Vermont. We do have an Amtrak train that goes from Brattleboro to Burlington and back, which a lot of people don't know. So this is the concept they came to us with. The project team looked at it, and after we went back and forth and asked them questions, this was the one that the project team wanted to recommend. It's important that you folks understand going forward that this may change based on outreach that we're going to do to the community. Outreach, if we look around and people say, we don't want to do the mini campaign, that's not the right thing to do, we may target another group or another demographic. But we also want to continue having the community involved, so we have 3 individuals from the project team are going on to our, I can't remember, what are we calling it? Steering committee. Zahn Estes from the Juneau Orchestra, Lindsay Fahey from Retreat Farm, and Curtis Reed from the Vermont Partnership in Fairness and Diversity. Curtis was here, but he had to go because he's going to be doing something really early in the morning. But they're the ones that are going to be on the steering committee along with Stephanie and I to sort of shepherd the project over, I guess it's the next 9 months, because we've asked them to start and finish with the fiscal year. So we're hoping that they will be done, whatever we're going to do, by June 30th, 2020. They have proposed giving us deliverables, whether their targets are concerned, and if we do digital, it'll be clicks. We're going to have a landing page. That's part of the proposal, and we'll see how many people come to the landing page, click through. So we want to track it. I think it's really important that we're honest and upfront that in 9 months, us coming here and saying to you folks, oh, look, the rooms and meals tax went off the charts and this is why, you're not going to get that data in 9 months. But the project team, and I think we feel comfortable coming to you with this and hopefully moving forward with it. And we're here to answer any questions you have. And we're excited. And we hope you are too.
Thank you. I do have something I want to bring up. So I'm looking at the mini campaign, which is really focused on the LGBTQIA community. Yeah. And I'm reading the proposed partners and hearing the members of the steering committee, and I'm just wondering, I'm wondering if there's been any outreach to Out in the Open, formerly known as Green Mountain Crossroads, mm-hmm. And if not, I would strongly, even thinking about the steering committee, mm-hmm. strongly recommend, because when we're talking about the queer dance parties and the drag shows and these kind of events, a lot of time and effort has gone into that by Out in the Open, formerly Green Mountain Crossroads, and they're a deeply rooted, deeply active, invested group of people in the community, and I would really like to see a partnership with them as well. Yeah. Personally, that's something I would want to see.
Yeah, and that's what, and HB was here, and I was at a meeting earlier today with HB, okay. And they are on the list, on the top of the list to have the penniless projects people talk to. That's because obviously that was part of our concern, is we want to make sure that the people who need to be involved are involved.
So one thing to remember is that they put together a proposal without doing a deep dive research into the community. This other, in putting together, in answering an RFP, the marketing firms are only going to go so far in terms of their research. So their first step is answering the question of who is their target audience. And so when Kate said continuing the community input, that is market research. Is what are we already doing? What are our assets? How can we wrap that up all into a package in a much deeper dive? And so I thoroughly agree with you that if we're talking about our target audience, we need to be, number one, making sure that we have those assets in the community and making sure that what are we already doing to get that target audience here, and on and on and on. And so that's the work that they're charged with.
I appreciate that, because I will say that on page 8, under the scope of work, where I don't really think we want to use words like, or phrases like homosexual couples anymore. Like, I was a little like cringy, and from doing marketing at BSNL, like, I think even like a scratch dive into researching your audience would know that word is like a no-go, really, around here. It's cringy. In that. So I'm glad to hear that you've talked to HB. I have no doubt that they would.
We have not talked to HB yet.
Oh, okay.
We will.
But you
They're
mentioned
on the
talking.
list.
They're on the
Yes.
list, because I have no doubt that they will be very direct about how they want to be represented through this work.
Yep.
Meaning out in the open.
Yeah. Can I double down on that?
Okay.
So when I read this, so not so much the documents that you prepared, but the ones from panelist projects describing the project. I'll lay my cards very plainly on the table. So I often find marketing distasteful in general. So that's just where I'm at. And so I get it. You have to identify a market, right, in order to market to, right? And so we've marketed a group of people, and we'll then seek to either A, invite those people here, or B, get those people to spend money here. And you can feel however you want to feel about that. I don't love it. And the way in which this proposal was prepared by a marketing firm that is local enough to know, but did not engage in even the tiniest bit of outreach to the preeminent rural LGBTQ organization in Brattleboro, and an organization that is already bringing in hundreds of people every year that are spending money, that are staying in our community. And they're not coming here because they've been marketed to in a way where they saw a poster or something. They're coming here because they're having rich experiences that are connected to people in the community. And I feel that the fact that the marketing firm did not even send them an email is concerning to me. That's not to say that I think that they couldn't then further down the road come up with a brilliant marketing plan. But it just gives me pause right now, and makes me feel kind of icky, because I know that people who are engaged in this work are they're giving their lives to it, and they're right here, and they didn't even get a phone call.
Can I answer that question?
I feel that way too.
Is that okay? Yeah. None of the 8 proposals that we received reached out to anybody in the community. So I want to be really clear about that. And all of them said, here's what we're thinking. When and if and when you hire us, that's when we do the outreach.
Sure.
So there was no expectation from us to any of the people that proposed RFPs that they actually start the research. So I just don't want that to be held against them or any of the 8 people that gave us proposals.
Yeah, I suppose, if I could have my way, what I would like is if we do go ahead and, say, yes, this is what we want to go with, that they really do need to make some very robust efforts to connect with existing organizations that are already doing this work in our community.
And one of the things we
they might receive some very strong feedback because the work
maybe,
is so
yeah.
established
And,
in
you
this
know,
community.
I don't think that it serves anyone to not do outreach.
Yeah.
It serves everyone to say what is going on here already. What are the things? Who is the target audience? Who knows that audience best? All of those things, and the project team was really clear of. This is more than just your portfolio. You are shooting us one example of what a campaign could look like. What if we don't necessarily like that one example, which is different than when you look at a portfolio and you look at a company that did, Chipotle's advertising, and then they did this person's advertising, this person, and you go, yeah, I like your general vibe. I like your general energy. And so when we push back and they were very clear of, okay, if we decide to go with a target audience, we will do research and a deep dive on that target audience. If we decide to do this, then we'll do that. And so we expressed all of these same concerns and felt solid about the answer that we were given.
And I think it's more important to focus on, it's the Love Brattleboro campaign is the general campaign, and if there is this mini campaign into it, will that happen? But I think that when we were looking at it, it's the overall Love Brattleboro campaign is the big thing, and then if there is a mini, because Curtis Reed, if he were here, he would tell you he questioned them about marketing to people of color, which he wants them to do, so.
Right.
Yeah, do you mind if I throw cards on the table?
Sure.
I mean, I own a company that responds to RFPs, and I can tell you that just putting something together this complete and this thought out is a big time suck, and you're doing it, you're trying to look good and show that you can do what you're being asked to do, but you can't put in hours and hours and hours because it's all pro bono, it's all free work. So you have to strike a balance between, plus, honestly, in a lot of industries, and I'm sure it's true in advertising, you don't want to give away the farm as well. You don't want to give out all your ideas for someone else to pick up and run with, So I can see how this seems like, a great project. I don't need to be deciding on verbiage or things like that, because that's something that gets decided down the road, as these guys were saying, right? There's some great names involved that we all know, so I'm pretty positive about it. And they haven't been hired yet, so I don't know if you can criticize the campaign.
Right, but also the proposal that they put together is an example of what they think they can do.
What their thought is.
What they're all about. And so I want to see stuff in there that I feel excited about, and I just think that this town and this area's LGBTQ community is really, really an important part of what makes this place this place. So it brings me back to my ickiness about target markets and whatnot, and that's, I don't know, whatever, that's me. But I would like to think that any campaign, if it did target an LGBTQ market, would do some very, very robust community connecting before it did any of that work.
What about the rest of the scope? Because as Kate pointed out, it's more about the overall.
Yeah, I love Brattleboro. Sure, why not? I think it's fine. I'm going to stop talking so someone else can talk.
That'd be nice.
So, as the person at town meeting who suggested that you come before the select board for this review, I want to thank you. And I just want to note that you've come here twice, that you did this process, you weren't happy with it, you came again, and I appreciate that rigor. And I think it's going to be fine. I also happen to know the people at Penniless Press, and I'm sure they're very professional and they'll do the right thing. I had a question. I don't know whether you can quantify the answer, but what was missing in the first group that was present in the second group? Do you know? Can you tell me that? Just at my own curiosity.
First group seems so long ago. I think there was more, especially one of them that we liked but didn't like, was we liked the concept, but we didn't like their graphics, you know, and there was sort of an unwillingness to work with us. Two of the ones, there were actually 3 finalists, and 2 of the ones revised their proposals and resubmitted. One of them, when we said to them, we like, you know, 75% of what you're doing, will you work with us on it? They said no, and we're like, well, you know, that's not the way it works. But I think the other 2,
Artists, right?
you know, there wasn't anything.
Yeah, I'm
Really?
trying to think. That's a good question. I think there was no common theme. It's kind of like hiring a person, because they are people, so you are hiring them. So there wasn't really a common theme. It was each one raised red flags for us for different reasons.
And so this was the clear winner.
Right.
For the second time around, yeah.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
David?
I think, I recognize that this is an example, a sample, a place to start. I think if you're going to target an audience and you're going to try to represent Brattleboro, that audience is going to have to be not just specified by gender, but by race and by ability, that it's going to need to be inclusive. And, you know, starting out with this kind of a campaign, I think, just by itself, to the exclusion of those other groups, I think is not a good idea. I don't know, it's not gonna make it easy, it's probably gonna make it a lot more complex, but I think you can't, that's what.
Wait, can you say that again? Are you saying that a target audience needs to be everybody?
Yeah, it needs to be inclusive. If it's gonna be specific to any particular group, it needs to be specific to those 3 specific groups in terms of including them in that group.
And those 3 being?
Race, gender, and ability.
But isn't that the opposite of the concept of a target audience?
It could well be. It probably is. But I think if you're going to be representing Brattleboro in a campaign, those are the things that the community's been very clear on its commitment
Yes,
to equity and those, or
but
to
representing
inclusion there.
Brattleboro, having all of those things in representing Brattleboro, but not necessarily going out to a Connecticut suburb and saying, we think that you people will love Brattleboro.
Right.
So the Brattleboro is showing a true picture of being inclusive of all of Brattleboro.
Is that what you mean?
So within a big campaign, are you saying there's sub-targeting that could be taking place? So the Love Brattleboro campaign is all inclusive of all the beautiful humans.
Right.
But certain aspects of that campaign, certain monies might go towards different markets outside of Brattleboro. So is that?
That's what I'm understanding, but I'm not sure if that's what you're saying.
Well, as I look through here, I don't see any differently abled or differently
Okay.
colored people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And
in this example.
Right.
And that if you're going to represent Brattleboro, that has to be.
Yes,
part of
and we're,
it.
Okay,
and
I
we're with.
understand that, yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Can I ask a granular question? So like the data tracking, I see that that's mostly through like clicking through to websites. Will that data be owned by Penniless Projects, or will that data be owned by the Community Marketing Initiative?
Community Marketing Initiative.
It's
So
us.
you'll get full,
Yes.
granular, super granular. Okay.
Yes.
Okay, because that's kind of the point of this.
Which
right?
we will in turn present to you.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, I'd love to see it. And then I guess I had one other comment that's sort of about numbers. Like, so the bigger concept, right, the Love Brattleboro concept, does use this sort of like by the number. That's not the right phrase, because that's a really pejorative phrase. But like it uses numbers,
Yeah.
right? And I think that one of the great things about our town is not that we have like X number of things, but it's like what those things are and who's running those things, and you know the.
I like
Quality, not
It's
quantity.
quality, not quantity, right? Like,
That's
you
funny,
know,
I actually like that.
I mean, sometimes people will tell me on the street that we have 3 empty storefronts, right? Like, we're not going to put that on our marketing campaign. And there's more to the story of 3 empty storefronts than just the number. And much the same way that there's more than, you know, numbers don't tell much of a story, I think, about our wonderful little place.
And just remember, we have not sat down and talked with them in detail.
I know.
However,
But we'll
I do
just
have
I
a.
think we're more just giving food for
How-
thought, too.
Right.
Yeah, however, I feel like even in sitting down, one of my goals of this was that they are the experts. And I really wanted to walk away hiring someone that is going to get this and run with it. Because all of us in the room have our opinions, just like if we all opened up a People magazine, some ads would relate to you and some ads would relate to you. And so that's what I wanted to walk away after offering someone the contract, that they know what they're doing.
Sure. And there's an element of trust here, right? So
Yes.
there's trust in like
Yes.
the work that you all did.
Yes.
And there's
Yes.
trust in town meeting's decision.
Yeah.
And if
There's
it
a
doesn't
little
work,
bit of trust here
Yeah.
that we're gonna, actually do our homework and care about it. And
Yeah, right. But realize too, we're going to do our homework and care about it too.
I know.
You know what I mean?
That's not even a question.
100%.
Yeah, and we all,
Yeah.
so I just want to put you at
For me,
ease
it's
that
not.
just because the graphic looks like this doesn't
Yeah.
mean it will
right,
eventually.
good.
It could, but it couldn't.
Okay. And then, and what if it ends up looking like a campaign that we all hate?
I know.
I know.
They
There
won't
has
get
been
another
sometimes,
contract.
But we get to
Give
see
me
that
one
usually
check.
they'll
There's
see it
always gonna
before
be-
it runs and they'll know what we're gonna hate.
West Mass.
Yeah. But I do want to remind ourselves that it's like anytime we offer a job position, that sometimes it doesn't work out.
Right,
Yeah.
you're absolutely right.
And I agree with you that
Yeah.
that wouldn't work out.
David, you've been trying to say
We have a
something.
good
Well,
guess.
no, I'm wondering how far we have to go before we.
Oh, I don't know. I mean,
make
I
a
think we're
motion,
probably
move,
gonna,
Move to accept
I
this
just would say,
plan.
can you please school them on not using words like homosexual?
I didn't
That's what-
find that in
That's
there.
all these things that
Where is
I'm
that?
saying, I'm not saying whether or not I would vote. I'm gonna vote for it. I just wanna make sure that you
Oh,
go to them and say,
okay. I have
also
two
the
questions
print
that
is
I want
really
answers to
faint,
before we
so-
do any kind of voting.
that's all right. Well, Franz has got one too.
Okay, go ahead, Francis. I've had loads
you
of.
can always make a motion and then have
Yeah.
further questions.
You can't. We just don't do it that
We
way.
don't usually.
But you can.
Franz Reichman from the Finance Committee. I just want to point out that Liz, as the proposer for this motion at town meeting, was piggybacking that on the back of her tenure on the Finance Committee. So I'm just pointing
Franz.
out what a powerful institution this can be. Somewhat more substantively, is there something in here about the actual dollars that will be spent on this,
Yep.
as opposed to, will there be something left over for implementation, or just talk about the money a little bit?
Yeah, the budget is all inclusive of implementation, media buys, design work.
They want all the money, Fran.
It's not a lot.
All
We're
inclusive.
not keeping any of it back.
17.
But I can't remember what page.
But I think what your
Page
question was
17.
it's not just for
17,
salary
yeah.
of
Yeah.
the marketing people.
Well, just, could you,
Page 17.
page 17.
Yeah.
I will consult page 17 to answer my question, thank you.
And just
Well done.
when you're consulting page 17, this was representative of what other people did with their budgets too. I mean, this was in line of,
Okay,
we wanted money for implementation, so this is what marketing.
all right, great, thank you.
I just have one more suggestion. I don't know why this is in such
I
faint
know, it
type,
needs to be black, not
but
gray.
I can't read it.
I don't know. I'm a fan of the gray. See, like as a marketing person, the
Filters
gray and the
out.
orange is a thing.
It
Yeah.
filters
It's
out the
beautiful.
boomers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, boomer. Nice.
Okay, so,
You're not the target audience.
Appreciate that.
Nobody hashtag anything right now.
Daniel, did you say?
I have two
Two
questions.
things?
Actually, I think I really might only have one. No, I have not. I'm sorry. I care a lot about this and I have questions. So the town meeting approved 10% of the rooms and meals tax revenue for a 1-year thing, right? But I've also read that this is sort of part of like a 5-year plan. So tell me about year 2.
Throughout this entire process, we have been proposing an ongoing. We never were proposing a one and done thing. This is a building thing.
So,
Go big and assume it's gonna be so good that it gets reapproved.
Right.
okay.
So next town meeting.
So
they'll
next
ask
town
for
meeting,
more.
you'll ask for 10% of the rooms and meals revenue?
Just, we'll do a foreshadowing of the future. We did note that it was in the budget under business promotion for $42,119. So we hope that it would stay in, but that's obviously up to you folks and then up to town meeting.
Okay.
Would we?
I thought you had 2.
Yeah, it was like the outreach thing, so you talked about like how there would be a period of outreach. To whom?
I would really like to call that the research. It's not public outreach.
Right.
It's the firm coming in and doing their homework on what should the target audience be, who should the target audience be, how do you reach them, what are we already doing, what are our tools at our disposal, what are our hurdles, all of those things.
Doing the work that the proposal says they'll do.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yes.
And I believe Brandy and I have both been quite clear about that.
Very, and we are we're just as clear. Yeah.
Yeah.
Quite clear.
Not quite a majority. Yes, thanks.
Yeah.
All right. No more questions. I'm done.
We have a public question.
You can come up and ask a question. This is the.
Oh,
Yes, yes. Just come up and introduce
Your
yourself.
comment is
Sorry,
welcome.
I'm Peter May. I'm here for the next item as well. I'm the president of the DPA, newly anointed. I just want to give a shout out to Stephanie and Kate and the committee. I can't tell you behind the scenes actually how many volunteer hours got us to this point.
I believe that.
And just like this conversation has ranged around and people have their opinions, the same thing happened there, even among marketing professionals. So I think the leap of faith here is that there's been a process, there's been a ton of consultation already. We've taken a bet. Who knows? I mean, I think we're confident that that'll work. We've talked to them about some of the concerns in terms of the dollar amount. $40,000 sounds like a big amount of money, but in the marketing world,
It's nothing.
it's really not. And so, we've been in dialogue with this vendor to say, look, we need to focus this money as targetedly as possible. Digital probably over a lot of print and ads and
I was
things like
glad to
that.
see that, yeah.
And, so those kinds of things are taking place. But mostly I just want to give a shout out to these two. It's also an opportunity, and we'll talk about this a little bit, to collaborate between the DBA and your chamber. And actually doing this helped us, we had to actually overcome some differences of opinion about which proposal we should take, what are the risks, and we ended up coming with a unified recommendation to you. So that, to my mind, was also really a good progress from my standpoint. So
Great.
anyway, thank you for spending the time on this. I know it's gotten late, so.
Thank you. It's okay. That's what we do.
And I want to say it's great to see the two powerhouses in town at the same table.
There's a lightning bolt going on.
Great. Don't you think? No?
I was making
Oh,
like a
good.
point.
Supportive faith?
Yeah,
Thank
supportive
you.
faith. Okay, are we ready for a vote?
Yep.
Who's gonna do it?
I think Liz should do it.
All right, I think that's true.
Folded up my paper.
No, put my nose on. Sorry, but that doesn't seem right.
Okay, I make a motion.
Stop. This is the theme for us.
Oh,
Sorry.
boy.
I make a motion to accept the Brattleboro Community Marketing Initiative Plan as presented.
Okay, Liz has made said motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you
Thank
very
you
Go
much.
for it,
much.
Dave.
Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
don't think Stephanie's gone
No,
anywhere.
Stephanie's, I can now go
Okay,
home.
bye, Kate. Sorry,
Bye,
Stephanie.
Kate. Thank you.
Have a nice evening.
Okay, Stephanie retains a seat because we now move to the Downtown Brattleboro Alliance Annual Work Plan, Budget, and Town Meeting Article, which is item E, and the last item for this evening. Hello again, Stephanie.
Thank you. Thank you. and reintroducing Peter, who I'm very excited. Aaron
Peter.
Skaggs is also our new vice president, who's in the room.
Aaron, welcome
So-
to join you.
Hi, Aaron.
Do you want to come and be
You've
at the
been
table
called
with
out.
us, or-
You're welcome to.
You don't
yeah,
have
Bring a
to.
chair.
No, right here.
We've got plenty of chairs. Whoever wants to sit.
So just by way of background, as a reminder of how we get to this point, as you know, the DBA is the downtown organization for the DID, but in terms of process for the budget, every year the board creates a draft budget, and it then goes to the members for input and questions and thoughts. Then it comes back with any tweaking, and then it goes back to the members for a vote. And then it goes from the members to the board.
All right.
And the board
And
approves
then,
it.
and then the
brings
board
it to
approves
you.
it and then brings it to you. So that's the process that we have to go, and then every single step of the way, it was unanimous on the budget. Something different that I did this year is I gave you a look at all 4 years, and hoping to see a bigger picture of where we're headed and how we're growing each year, and because we all found that really helpful. In terms of the budget that is proposed, the FY21 budget, it looks very similar to the current budget that we're in. And so I thought what would be helpful is to look at where we've been in the last 4 months, because we're 4 months into this current budget. And then to talk about any specifics that you have about it.
Okay.
Okay. And now I just need to find my notes. 1 second. Okay. So the last 4 months, this summer, we created a Summer in the Streets program along with the town, and we accomplished 10 different pop-up gigs that happened all over downtown, and that was really a way to put creative energy that we are in this town out on the streets. And then we also did work supporting you all in your great work of installing porta potties around the town and helped to magnify that. So those are a couple examples that we did this summer. We also spent a lot of time on the community marketing initiative that we just proposed, and we ended this summer with the Alley Lane pop-up project, which was probably one of the best things that came out of that was a partnership of all people who have never worked together, came together for the AARP grant that funded that. And so 3 artists of Ask the River that will be doing the permanent installation on the parking garage, Experience Goods, VCP, Brattleboro Area Prevention Coalition, and DBA. And so we just had an incredible experience of starting from the very beginning to the very end, creating an event that wouldn't have been its way, that wouldn't have the outcome it had if it wasn't for each person at the table. So that was phenomenal. We then moved right into our fall with the annual meeting and the membership drive. We are on track to have increased membership. So if you remember, DBA's membership is automatic with property owners, but then we do have the mechanism to have $25 a year members. And so we're really working on increasing that to be able to be very representing of the entire community of downtown. We took part in the Town's Better Block Challenge and partnered with the library in creating a project that would really magnify the smallness of our town and the walkability of our town, and to remind people that they don't need to park at one spot and then get in their car and park at another spot depending on where they're going. And that was a great project. Then more recently, we have for the first time ever fundraised around our flower program and had great success. We had a donor say that they would match up to $2,500. So we did a 24-hour digital fundraising campaign, ended up exceeding our goals. So we raised the full $5,000 via the GoFundMe campaign and still got the $2,500 match. And then on top of that, an anonymous donor said, well, what about the people who don't do it digitally, the people who would want to write a check? And so they offered a $2,500 match for any checks that came in to DBA for the flower program. We also partnered with Girls on the Run, a local landlord, and a local artist, Hope Phelan, to do a mural, and we installed a mural in the alleyway between Ruggles and Hunt and Echo Restaurant. So if you see a theme, the overarching theme is a lot to do with art and a lot to do with partnerships. We work with BDCC in the state on the State of State program, and also had the opportunity given to us for the state of Vermont to do a promo video that they choose which towns they highlight, and they chose Brattleboro, and that just came out. It's a 1-minute promo that they will use in promoting Southern Vermont and Brattleboro specifically. And that takes us to Brattleboro, which we just finished with 51 stops, about 300 trick-or-treaters on what was thought to be possibly a canceled Halloween night, and it ended up being actually really wonderful weather for it. And we did all that program type work and a lot of events driven work, all as well as our digging in and working on Brattleboro coalition work. So whether that is with ongoing conversations around housing issues, ongoing conversations around childcare issues, all things on continuing to cultivate Brattleboro to be the town and the community that we want to be living in. We prioritize those conversations and we make sure that we're part of them. We also have been looking a lot at where is Brattleboro going, and so one of that kind of takes us to bike trail work a lot. There's some stuff brewing around that, and then it also right now is looking at a potential huge grant from the Boston Federal Bank and visioning a 10 years. Where do we want Brattleboro to be in 10 years? And this grant is wanting to fund work towards that goal. Lastly, I just like to touch on social media. So Facebook, we're really continuing to do great work. We increased our followers by 487 just in this fiscal year in 4 months. And to give you perspective on that, last year we increased it by 1,097. So we're on track to do better than last year. All of that to say that every single thing that we do, we try to make incremental change to making sure that we're ensuring that Brattleboro is sustainable and full of vibrant community.
Thank you. I think it's really important that you talk about the events that you put on, and I know that I've attended the Halloween. I don't know that I'll go neighborhood trick-or-treating. My kids are young. Last year we tried to go neighborhood trick-or-treating and it was a nightmare because I just couldn't see them. So this year we did downtown instead, and it was so lovely. My favorite part was the spooky Harmony Tunnel, Harmony Law Tunnel. It was, the kids were like talking about it for the rest of the night. It was very spooky.
Totally missed it.
Oh, you missed out on that. And the reason I think it's important to keep driving that home is there is, as you know, kind of this current of discontent that we only care about tourism. And that's always a hard pill to swallow in Vermont, because Vermont is largely a state that's driven that way. So I really like that you continue to, the Summer in the Streets was great, like continuing to do those really like grounded in the community things is really important.
And I'd like to add that with Summer in the Streets, it felt really good because we paid all of the musicians. And so often artists are asked to donate their time, and we paid each one, I think, like $50 an hour to perform, which felt really good.
I bet. Yeah,
and
it's
required
fantastic.
fundraising to do.
That's fantastic.
So
Yeah, the work around the community being more visible has been, I think, has been extremely noticeable.
Thanks. Thank you. What was Summer on the Street?
Oh, it was parties.
Summer in the Streets was the idea that we want to put creative energy out on the sidewalks. And so we did 10 different pop-up gigs. So that could have been a face painter. It was Tai Chi. Aaron was out there with the giant twister game in Pliny Park. Guitar players, fiddle players. So anything that provides that energy of what's happening over there, and let me go check it out.
And the LA Street Block Party, which was my favorite. That was part of that, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a blast.
I just want to comment from coming in as the board chair, going into my second year. Last year when I was here, I talked a little bit about, it's a decent amount of money the taxpayers are getting. It's a special assessment. And I just want to represent that, in terms of the next couple of years, we're building our board even more. We've got 3 or 4 new board members coming on. Nice balance of gender on the board, the kinds of things we want to see and model for other organizations in the community in terms of inclusion. And that also we're really taking care of watching every month what's going on with the budget, stewarding these funds. When we need the money, we do it. There's always way too many things to do, and this board is really taking its role seriously to make sure that we're stewarding those funds, investing them in the places where we can get the most bang for the buck. And again, I just would thank Stephanie publicly for for the amount of time, the amount of meetings she comes to, and when I see her, she's very engaged in the community, and people will come up to her on the street and just give feedback on things. So I'm really pleased with the trajectory of where we're headed, and just want to reassure you that the board is also taking its role seriously.
Thank you for that.
Can I ask a question about the board? I think I might have just answered it. Well, Liz answered it. I wanted to know who was on the board, we don't need to know super detailed, but how many folks you mentioned?
So we have 11 board members now. Okay. Actually, we after town meeting realized, hey, we didn't have them on our website, so people couldn't find them. So we put the names up on the board, and I've asked actually Stephanie to put her own name on the website as well. So and I think those kinds of transparency things, those are on my agenda. Yeah. Going forward, getting minutes up on the website and things like that, so that people understand what we're doing.
Right. And then I was kind of curious about the mix of folks on the board, because I think sometimes we're under the misunderstanding that the DBA is about the downtown businesses, but it's the downtown Brattleboro Alliance. And so I was wondering if the board represents a fairly varied cross section of who's downtown, not only business owners.
Yeah, do I want to take that? So, I think that, because we're funded by the downtown property owners, we want to make sure that we are responsive to their needs. And then secondarily, but also a cool, even one, is the businesses themselves who are part of the thriving community that we have here that we want to preserve. And then I think the other categories that I look at are who are the employers, the big employers in town, and because we're trying to draw people who are both visitors to the community, who are residents of the community, to make their experience downtown that much more exciting, and also businesses that might want to relocate to the community. So I think, Daniel, that it's a mix of all those things, and as I'm looking at the board over the next 3 years, balancing that, I think we have a pretty good balance right now of folks who have, then you want to have people with business acumen and lawyers, who are guilty of that. So it's a nice mix right now, and we're keeping an eye on that.
Okay. Thanks.
Could you just explain what the DID assessment is and where it comes from?
Yes, that's the property tax assessment that's put on all the DID property owners.
That's the piece that ties to our budget as well.
Yeah,
the rest of this stands alone. The 80 is also an expenditure in our budget, both a revenue line item and an offsetting expenditure.
I would imagine that's why we're here to vote on that.
That's why they come before you with their proposed budget exactly, is so that everybody's on the same page about what the work plan is for the year, so that you can then support the piece of it that is funded through town taxes.
And are we doing that this evening?
If you're ready to do it this evening, you can do it this evening. We'll be back before you as we get closer to putting the town meeting warning together with the specific language for the the individual town meeting warning item that speaks to this. But if as a budgetary matter, you're satisfied with what you've heard and you don't need to hear anything further, then you could give your tentative approval to it. If you'd rather,
Is this something that's generally voted on at town meeting?
it's always voted on at town meeting separately as an individual item. And as a town budget matter, the last couple of years it's been much smoother. Historically, there were some bumps in the relationship between prior leadership of the DBA and the town. And so there were times when it was 3 or 4 visits at this time of year, but the last couple of years it's been 1 visit, and you could proceed on that basis if you're satisfied with what you've seen tonight.
Right. And so I would ask what the board, oh, there you are, Dave.
Oh, I have a quick comment.
Yeah.
This was just about Brattleboro. This is sort of like a pleasant comment. So I found it also to be a great experience. And I was looking at my calendar, realizing that next year, I think we dodged a bullet with the weather. So, I mean, we dodged a raindrop with the weather. And I think the word is spreading, and it's going to be even bigger next year. And it falls on a Saturday, and it falls in a full moon. Realize that. So that's even spookier, right?
Something all right.
And I know I've already scared Peter with this idea, but I'm going to bring up further down in the year the idea of maybe closing off a street or two for the parade. I think it would be a great idea, and it does cost the taxpayers money, but we could maybe work something out with a shared cost commitment. Who knows? But I've been looking for some excuses to maybe close the streets once in a while.
Yeah, I actually missed when Gallery Walk was closed the street.
Yeah.
We're in favor.
Right.
I think it did that.
That'd be great.
So.
I think it is a lot more vibrant.
I think it's a good excuse to think about, pedestrian streets and that kind of thing. So just wanted to throw
It's
that
a
out
novel
there.
idea. Think about pedestrians.
We don't have to talk about that now. But
So what is the
It's a very
board's
pedestrian
pleasure?
idea. It's a very pedestrian idea.
nice. All right. 9 o'clock, Joe.
Your pleasure is to vote. What about
Oh yeah, I
Liz?
think so.
Yeah.
Daniel? All right, then who wants to make the motion?
Do we have language?
Yeah, you don't need to formally approve just this line item,
Okay.
but an indication from the board that you don't need further information on this, that you're
Okay.
satisfied with this, and it'll just stay in the budget.
Okay.
I think provides the assurance to the DBA that they need and the feedback to staff that we need.
Excellent.
Because then you do a general vote for the entire budget? You don't go line by
Absolutely.
line?
Right.
Okay, got it.
God, we try not to.
And that won't happen until the end of January.
Right, okay.
Great. Yeah.
Okay,
So we have just a consensus.
let's just take a consensus vote of sorts. Does anybody who feels that we're good to go with what we've seen tonight, please raise your hand.
Aye.
Aye, aye. For anybody who's not watching, all hands were raised. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I also
Okay.
did want to recognize, and I apologize, one part of my work is to obviously greet and welcome new stores into town and new people into town. And Nash and Lita are not new to the community, but we are very warmly welcoming them to
We're
the
very
downtown
excited.
community. And I appreciate you coming out tonight.
Yes.
Say the name
Thank
of
you.
the store.
Oh,
In the name of the business.
Yeah.
Josa Kitchen.
Josa!
They're moving somewhere.
Where Provisions was on
Yeah.
Elliott Street.
So that's between
You
the
are?
used bookstore
Yeah.
and Peter Havens on Elliott Street.
Thank you.
Man, we're so excited. Everybody's talking about it that I talked to, so.
Can we invite them to say a little something about what their plans are?
If
as
you
long
would
as
like
they're
to,
here?
in these
I'm willing to
last
stay for
moments,
that.
You're welcome to either go to whatever microphone you
Well,
find.
Lita can handle that.
I'll be so close to town.
Early December, Josa Kitchen Cafe. And it's gonna be a storefront with beautiful seating with a lot of light at the window. And then there's gonna be lots of seating in the back for overflow. We'll seat 30 to 40 people, and we'll be open for lunch. And also, we'll be open every gallery walk, and private dinners and ticketed dinners, but we won't be open regularly for dinner.
Okay.
And we'll have our regular dosa menu, and we'll have some more items. We'll have soups in the winter, some gluten-free type bread, cracker things to go with soups, and lots of dosas. We're really excited to be moving back downtown.
Where is it going to be?
34 Elliott Street. 34 Elliott Street.
Excellent.
Yeah, it's in Peter Havens, technically, so we're.
Yep.
Thank you very much for that. So early December, lunches and gallery walks and some private dinners.
Couldn't
Go
imagine
in.
why you came to the meeting tonight. Now I know.
I wonder too.
We're going to press them for their membership fee next.
Hang in there to the
Now that they're downtown.
Okay, so after all of this robust and wonderful business, I would now entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourns at 10:05. Good night.
Thanks, BCTV.
Thank you.
So we hold on to the blue.
Please do hold on to the blue.
I'm gonna give mine to Jan.
Put stickers on it.